Good afternoon and welcome to the following officials from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, the Ministry of Works and Transport, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry. I am Bridget Anizet George, and I am the Chairman of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the 12th Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. The Committee on Public Administration and Appropriations, PAAC, has the mandate to consider and report to the House on A, the budgetary expenditure of government agencies to ensure that expenditure is embarked upon in accordance with parliamentary approval, B, the budgetary expenditure of government agencies as it occurs, and keep Parliament informed of how the budget allocation is being implemented, and C, the administration of government agencies to determine hindrances to their efficiency and to make recommendations to the government for improvement of public administration. The purpose of this meeting is to examine the impact of rising fuel prices on the transport sector, retail sector, energy sector, and households. The role of the committee is, 1, to determine the hindrances being faced by the key stakeholders and possible solutions to these hindrances, and 2, to assist the key stakeholders in achieving the efficient delivery of services while ensuring that expenditure is embarked upon in accordance with parliamentary approval. This meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live on the Parliament's Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners can send their comments related to today's topic via email parl101@ttparliament.org, at Facebook at ttparliament, and Twitter at ttparliament. At this time, I would ask the members of the committee to kindly introduce themselves, starting from my furthest right.
Good afternoon, members. I am Randall Mitchell, member of the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. I am Lawrence Islop, member.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman, members. I'm Charlotte Patterson, member.
And I'll now invite the representatives from the various ministries to introduce themselves in the order of Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Works and Transport, Social Development and Family Services, and then Ministry of Trade and Industry. So we start with Energy and Energy Industries.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I am Penelope Bradshaw-Niles, Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm Sandra Fraser, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I am Karinsa Tulsi, Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm Wendy Guy Hernandez, Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I am Ayasha Nikki, Director of Downstream Petroleum Management Division at the Ministry of Energy.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I am Craig Badu, Senior Energy Analyst at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I am Sonia Francis Yearwood, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Works and Transport.
Good afternoon, everyone. Adande Pigot, Chief Traffic Engineer, Ministry of Works and Transport.
Good afternoon, Chair, members. I am Patrick Gomez, General Manager, PTSC.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I am Clive Clark, Transport Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Chair, members. I'm Claude Bayer, Project Analyst at NITCO.
Ministry of Social Development.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I am Brennan Gorey, Director of Monitoring and Evaluation.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. My name is Angelique Taylor. I am the Senior Planning Officer, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Good afternoon, Chair members. I am Elizabeth Villarreal, Acting Director, Social Welfare, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I am Cian Raymond, the Director of the Social Investigations Division at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Good afternoon all. Randall Karim, the Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Eva Mahabir Das, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Acting Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Good afternoon to the Chair and members. I am Candice Lackinsing, Director of Strategy, Business Facilitation and Program Management at the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Thank you, everyone. At this time, I would like to invite the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you very much. Trinidad and Tobago, although a natural gas and oil producer, has been taking steps to transition towards greener fuel consumption. This is evidenced by our commitment to the Paris Agreement and by our Vision 2030 Pillar 5, which places the environment at the center of social and economic development. In order to do this, there are several initiatives which we have undertaken, which includes methanol blended fuel, continued CNG consumption, incentives for electric vehicles, and also using alternative fuels, example, methanol as bunkering fuel. Thank you.
Thank you, Piers. This time, invite the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Works and Transport, to make a brief opening statement.
Once again, good afternoon, Chair, members, colleagues from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and the viewing public. The Ministry of Works and Transport views this present examination as one of extreme informational value to its mandate of providing efficient and effective national transportation to the public of Trinidad and Tobago. To this end, my team and I stand ready to answer your questions to the best of our collective knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, PS, Ministry of Works and Transport, and then we can now go on to the PS of Ministry of Social Development and Family Services to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services welcome the opportunity to meet and discuss with the Public Administration and Appropriation Committee the impact of rising fuel prices on the transport sector, retail sector, and energy sector and households. The Ministry is mandated with a responsibility for addressing the social challenges of poverty, social inequality, and social exclusion. As a result, particular emphasis is placed on developing and executing programs and services to protect and assist those who are classified as vulnerable and marginalized groups, such as persons with disability, the elderly, the poor and indigent, socially displaced persons, families, and persons living with HIV and AIDS, as well as at-risk youth. Guided by the tenets helping, empowering, transforming lives, the Ministry aims to empower and transform its clients through rehabilitative and restorative programs and skill enhancement initiatives, which promote human prosperity in the context of sustainable development. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services is also responsible for developing, coordinating, monitoring, and evaluating social sector policies and programs to ensure sustainability, cultural relevance, and economic viability. Based on the foregoing, the Ministry, from a human and social development perspective, recognizes the important economic issue concerning the impact of rising fuel prices on households and the potential for adverse social consequences on the daily lives of poor and vulnerable citizens, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but across the globe. As a consequence, the Ministry looks forward to today's discourse and deem it necessary to inform the relevant policy approaches to mitigate gradually reduce and weather future impacts of oil shocks on our vulnerable population, including low-income households. Madam Chair, I thank you.
Thank you very much, P.S. And now to the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It is a privilege for us to appear before this committee to discuss the very important issue of the impact of rising fuel prices on the retail commodity market. The Ministry recognizes the significant contribution of the retail sector and, of course, notes its intrinsic link to manufacturing, logistics, and other sectors of the economy. The retail sector is a catalyst for economic activity in Trinidad and Tobago and plays a critical role generally in moving goods throughout the economy from producer to the end consumer. We are therefore pleased to contribute to the discussions of the committee this afternoon, and myself and the team that we have brought will be more than happy to share our expertise.
Thank you so much to the PS of Ministry and Trade and Industry. In starting off the discussion, I would like to begin with the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. And with respect to your submission, and generally to put it in context, where as part of the nationally determined contributions, we are looking at reducing emissions from public transportation by 30% by December 31st, 2030. If, therefore, the Ministry could let us know where are we with respect to achieving that target.
Thank you very much, Chair. So with respect to public transportation in particular, which is just one of the broader aspects in terms of emissions that we address. Fortunate that the other ministries that might be more directly involved in the implementation of that is here, which is the Ministry of Works. And I know, and I have been a very small part of the process in terms of achieving that goal. So I will leave, for them to expand more. But just in terms of reducing emissions, in terms of power generation, and the Ministry of Energy has been involved in terms of getting to our goal of the 10% of our power generation. We had a goal of 2021, but we are well on our way in terms of the actual construction, right, of the Project Lara solar plants, which will help us to achieve that. And in addition, we are currently working in terms of carbon capture, utilization and sequestration. I'm the chair of a cabinet-appointed committee, which involves the universities, Heritage Petroleum, National Gas Company, Atlantic LNG, where we are looking at reducing our carbon emissions from the Point Lisas industrial, our petrochemical, and our LNG industry using carbon sequestration or storage in our depleted reservoirs, and also utilizing it for enhanced oil recovery within the oil fields. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the guidance with respect to the question that was asked. So maybe I could develop what you've answered in terms of, I'm not sure with respect to the target for 2021, I'm not certain that I understood whether it has been achieved or if it has not been achieved. I know you said you're well on the way, but
yes.
I'm not sure what that meant.
Yes, so in terms of we have not achieved it yet because that project is still, the plants are currently being under construction. So it was signed and agreed to at the end of 2022. And right now, things are in place for construction. So in terms of the actual implementation where the plant will be up and running, right, that will be achieved in 2024, 2025. However, all the things are in place, meaning the agreements and the construction is we are en route towards the achievement of the 10%.
So, if I understand it well, the 10% will be achieved by 2025?
25, yes.
Okay, so then how would that impact? Because it means you would have had to re-strategize your whole approach. How would that impact your ultimate goal? What plans you have to make up for the lost time?
So right now we have some other projects in place, which are much smaller, right, in terms of the amount of solar, but we have other projects where we are looking at wind, we are looking at additional solar. And so the next target we have, which will be 30% by 2030, we will be continuing to work towards getting more projects online by 2030.
Okay, so can I then ask then that what lessons you would have learned having regard to having not met your 2021 target? What lessons you have learned that you can rely on to assure that you will reach your ultimate target in 2030?
Well, the key thing is that the solar project, which in terms of going through the development of that, it was the first for us. And what we have done now in terms of our learning as a ministry, as a country, in terms of even the expertise that we needed, we are now at a different place. So we now have basically the framework and the blueprint of how we can continue. So once we would have crossed that, I think that we'll be able to implement much faster, towards 2030, because we have already done it for this initial project.
And are there any setbacks that you could anticipate now that would affect your 2030 target?
At this time, no. But what we need to always look at is that the environment, there's a global demand in terms of equipment, in terms of, because everyone globally is trying to achieve the same thing. So what we have found is that some of in terms of the cost and the availability of suppliers and so on, that's something that we have to constantly keep, monitoring because of the global demand. And so in terms of moving forward towards 2030, that's one of the key things that we also have to look at.
Okay, so I guess you will have issues of budget and,
yes.
and resource availability.
The thing about it is that generally, because globally there are a lot of initiatives, there's a lot of different avenues for funding available. Right, and so in terms of the financing, one of the things, we have a lot of avenues that we could look at for financing as well. All right, so I think we are well placed because of where we are, we have an abundance of sunlight, we have the wind, and we are also doing some of the background work for wind. And so I think that we are well placed, and we have a team we have developed. We have our renewable energy division. Our DPS here is focused quite a lot in terms of what we call green hydrogen, which is using solar and wind in terms of powering even the industry. So I think we are well placed in terms of moving forward.
Thank you. So in the submission PS, when you spoke about your cross-cutting policy initiatives, right, which are being pursued to enable the diversification of energy value chain and to facilitate clean power generation across all sectors. Could you kind of elaborate on what these initiatives are?
So what I'll do, I'll probably, DPS, you want to take that question?
Sure. Could you repeat, Chair, please?
Yeah, so I'm looking at your submission, and maybe to help guide you a little bit. This is page 7. And it's at the last sentence on page 7, which is, in recognition of your role as regulator, cross-cutting policy initiatives are being actively pursued to enable the diversification of the energy value chain and to facilitate clean power generation across all sectors. So I was asking if you could elaborate on these initiatives.
So as PS would have mentioned, our venture into renewable energy and this, the utility scale solar project was a first for us. And having recognized all of that, there's a need for interministerial collaboration for looking at the policy initiatives that are necessary to facilitate, the development of a viable renewable energy industry in Trinidad and Tobago. So those are some of the areas that we are focused on in terms of, legislative reform policy positions that are required to facilitate the successful implementation of renewable energy in Trinidad and Tobago.
So I guess we are legislators, so we understand how it works. In terms of you're talking about legislative reform, you first have to do your policy before you get to even the actual bill and so on. What kind of, we're looking at 2025, I think you're saying, but we're already in 2024. So what sort of time frames have you mapped out to assure us that these could be achieved by 2025? You talk about your green hydrogen industry, which is a pilot project for wind and green energy. We're hearing dates. We've already missed a target by about 3-4 years. I understand that, let's say, the groundwork has been done to jump off. But in terms of your mapping, if you could be a little clearer on that so that we too could be as satisfied as you that you'd reach those targets of 2025.
So maybe if I give an example, if we look at when we were looking at the evolution of the hydrogen economy, for example, and you are right, the policy decisions or initiatives have to come before you look at what is required legislatively. And so in terms of green hydrogen, you have to map out, in the short, the medium to long term, what is realistic for Trinidad and Tobago, and set your policies in that regard. So based on where we are currently, we have to look at looking at maybe evolution from what we have now as grey hydrogen to blue hydrogen, and then eventually to green hydrogen in the long term, because you require a substantial amount of renewable energy infrastructure in the long term for green hydrogen potential to be fully realized in Trinidad. So, in those aspects, we have to look at it as a phased approach and develop the policy and what is required legislatively from a phased approach.
Yeah, so, and that's what I'm asking. I understand it's a phased approach, and if there's a sort of map that identifies phases and timelines so that we're sure that we could get there within the end time you're telling us of 2025.
For green hydrogen, we've had a study done by the IDB which presents a roadmap for Trinidad and Tobago. It takes us all the way into 2065, where we would get to a substantial production amount of green hydrogen in the country. So along the way, we have to look at the policies, look at doing the evaluation for the wind resource assessment in the country, setting up the wind farms to produce the wind energy required onshore and offshore. And so that phased approach takes us through different milestones between now and 2065.
All right.
So that is laid out for us.
And in terms of now, the milestone that may have been targeted for now, January 2024, are you on target? If not, how far are you from target? When would you reach that target as identified in that map that you're using?
So initially, what is required for green hydrogen is the development of a pilot project for us to look at the economic and the technical feasibility of producing green hydrogen in Trinidad and Tobago, and so we are well on the way to developing that, that pilot project over the next couple of years.
So, all right, Deputy PS, so give me an idea when you say well on the way, so that, I mean, I guess from your technical point of view, you understand, but to help us and the members of the public understand, you're well on the way. 50%, you're near your target.
We are doing the technical and the economic feasibility for the...
And when is that
eventual,
expected to be completed?
That is ongoing currently, and then the next stage is to go out with actually doing the pilot project.
So when this study is going to be completed?
It is substantially complete, I would say. So maybe in the first quarter of this year, that portion of it should be completed.
That will be March of this year?
Yes.
Okay. And between the completion of the study and the start of the pilot, what type of time frame we're looking at?
Of course, as PS would have mentioned, there's you have to source equipment, you have to get your equipment into Trinidad, and so that takes there's some lag time with that as well. But all of that will come into planning for the project to ensure that it's delivered by a certain time frame.
All right. So, should I then understand that there are a number of variables which are not under your control in getting the pilot started?
Yes, that's
right?
correct.
And these variables that are not under your control, you have not, would I be correct in concluding that you have not made any steps to engage these variables?
I would say, yeah, sure.
Chair, I just want to say that with the green hydrogen in particular, we are working with National Energy, which is one of the state enterprises, and they are the ones that are really implementing on our behalf. And so the pilot, when they would be the ones that's actually developing. So what we are doing is working closely with National Energy in terms of moving forward, in terms of the pilot. So we don't have at this point in time, because all of that is part of the initial screening and developing what we'll be moving forward with. All right, but we will be able to supply, if you want, to the committee some more information with respect to this very shortly. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'll really be grateful for that.
And if I could just mention, because in that same area, we also spoke about the carbon capture. And so with respect to policy, I just want you to know that we have developed a draft policy, which was sent out for comments by the industry. It's in the second round of stakeholder feedback. Mm-hmm. We just sent an updated version, which has to do with carbon capture and storage, and also draft regulations or guidelines for if you have wells, which deals with injection of carbon dioxide. So with respect to the carbon capture and storage, we already have for the EOR, with the Enhanced Oil Recovery, based on our current Petroleum Act. We have that in place, mm-hmm. but we are now developing, and that is out for comment. So we expect by the end of 2024 that we will be able to make a submission to Cabinet and for it to move forward.
All right, that would be respect to your policy and so on.
Yes.
All right, okay, thank you very much. And therefore tell us something about this carbon storage atlas. If you could expand on what that is and where you've reached with that.
So thank you. So what has happened is that based on the mandate of the Cabinet-appointed committee, one of the different areas that we are working with is developing an atlas. We've produced oil and natural gas over 100 years. So we have reservoirs where we would have been depleted or we would have utilized the crude oil from it. So basically, those reservoirs will have space, now I'm using layman term space, that we would now be able to inject carbon dioxide into it for it to be stored and to stay there. And this is internationally recognized as one of the ways that you can reduce your emissions. So the universities, both UE and UTT, have been funded by the Ministry of Energy and some of the other companies, BP and Shell, for the areas that they have given them funding to do an overall look in different areas. We have areas on land, areas on the West Coast, areas on the East Coast, in terms of identifying some of these reservoirs that can be used, and also what's the capacity, how much carbon dioxide they can use. So they have just finished the first phase. We have a report which was developed, which gives some initial numbers, and they are currently going on to the second phase to do more detailed work.
Okay, so that in terms of this storage capacity and so on, when therefore would we likely reach the stage where we could implement the actual storage? And in the event that, how do we balance then the capacity we'd find from the studies versus what actually we will produce? How we balance that?
Yes, so on the other aspect of it, we have the National Gas Company undertaking studies because we produce carbon dioxide from the petrochemical plants. And with that, there are technical requirements in terms of where the carbon dioxide comes from, how it gets there in terms of pipelines, etc., that they are looking at. But in terms of the storage part of it, the next step, which the universities have proposed, is to do the same thing, a pilot. And so for 2024, they would be presenting a proposal on choosing one of the areas that they looked at to do a test in terms of the actual reservoir, to do a pilot study. So that's what we're working on for 2024. In addition, there are about 5, there's an established methodology developed by the Society of Petroleum Engineers, which gives a classification. So as you do more technical work, basically, in the same way that you would define petroleum reservoirs for production of oil and gas, it's the same process reversed for the storage of carbon dioxide. So there's quite a lot of technical work, and for commercialization, this may take, just like oil and gas reservoirs, anywhere from maybe 5 to 8 years to get to the point of actually doing a full-scale storage, to have a full-scale storage project. So, but again, so it takes time. We have to do the atlas, we'll do the pilot. They're doing other reservoir engineering work and studies, and eventually we will have companies coming in who specialize in this, which part of what we're doing in the policy is to give out areas where they can actually store the carbon dioxide. And so that's part of where we can do a license for it. And so we'll have it being done by commercial companies. So this may be closer to 2027, 2028 as we move along.
Okay, so thank you very much, PS. And one last thing, in terms of, you all had indicated that under your PSIP, you have projects for the installation of solar photovoltaic systems in 25 schools and community centers, which are to be completed this year, this fiscal or this calendar?
I will hand over to the head of the Renewable Energy Division to speak a little bit more about that project.
Right, these projects are supposed to be completed by the end of this year, calendar year.
Yes, calendar year.
Calendar year.
All right, so where are we in terms of, we have identified the 25 schools and community centers. The total is 25, or is 25 schools and 25 community centers, meaning 50?
The total amount of installations will be 25.
25. And how are they broken down between schools and community centers?
Right, I don't have the exact breakdown,
Yeah.
but these community centers and schools also serve as emergency shelters.
All right, so they've been identified?
They have been identified.
Yes.
We have done site visits. We have already tendered for the project. The contract has been awarded, and we are currently in the implementation phase.
So the funds have been secured?
The funds have been secured.
Released?
Released as well.
Completely?
National Energy is the company that would be the project manager, and funds have been transferred to National Energy for
the entirety?
Yes.
All right. So that you anticipate that the 25 schools and community centers will be finished by December 2024?
Yes.
Yes? Do you have like a schedule of a program of works with respect to how you go about it?
We do. I don't have it with me, but we can supply it to the Permanent Secretary.
Yes? Yes? So can that be shared with us, please? Thanks. And with respect to the installation of the car park, solar lighting, and electric vehicle chargers at Queen's School, which is carded for first quarter 2024. Where are we with that?
Right. So the same thing, the contract has been awarded. We expect that to be, it may have a slight delay there. Depending on Carnival, we will have to start implementation after Carnival. So the contract has been awarded. Again, National Energy is the implementation of the ministry there. Mm-hmm. So we will be running close to March, April, so that it be complete.
So you have a revised timeline of April?
So the timeline hasn't slipped officially as yet, but we expect to get the funds by the end of January. But the contract has been signed already, and the contractor is on board. Site visits have been done, and the equipment it hasn't been ordered as yet, but we have already identified all the equipment, etc.
You have already ordered?
No, the equipment has been, there's a list of equipment, so we know exactly what we need.
Yes, but there's been no mobilization?
No mobilization as yet.
All right. And you're telling us that you expect it to complete by first quarter 2024. You would have determined where you would have been by January 15, 2024. How much off the mark you are?
Right, so the contract was actually signed in December. It's difficult to say. I would say maybe a couple of weeks.
A couple of weeks. Okay, and as we speak, you expect mobilization to take place after Carnival?
Right. So these things would probably take about a month to ship in. So we expect the shipments to come in after Carnival. And hopefully, it shouldn't take a long time. It should take about a month to install, hopefully.
So once you get the equipment, it'll take a month for installation and your project will be completed?
Correct.
Okay? So, all right. So I would also ask if you all could give us in writing some kind of proper revision of your timeline so that we be certain that, and what other things you anticipate may be a threat to your reaching your target, your revised target, which I am working with as April 2024. Okay? So maybe I can pass the conversation on to any other member with respect to any question they may have for the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. Member Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. To the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, PS or Deputy PS. I understand the obligation for the transition towards greener fuels, but have you all undertaken any studies to determine whether the cost of transitioning and the cost to produce the greener fuels, whether they're more expensive or cheaper than the cost for us to import petroleum-based fuels?
So the thing is with, okay, so let us take, for example, the methanol blending. So the cost that you're comparing it to is really the cost as well of the impact of the environment, right? So there is a trade-off. The thing that with Trinidad and Tobago is that we are energy rich in terms of production. Natural gas is the cleanest of the fuels, right? And as you would have seen, we produce as well methanol. So what we're doing is that because we produce methanol in Trinidad and Tobago, blending of the methanol, for example, with your gasoline will actually reduce the amount of that you actually need to import, right? Because we produce the methanol here. So that's one way in which, if you look at methanol itself and decreasing the amount of, for example, premium fuel or gasoline that we can actually, it will be a savings in a sense. In terms of some of the other types of fuels, if you are speaking about, for example, for power generation like solar, again, what we are looking at is freeing up of natural gas molecules that we are actually using for our power consumption that we can use either for LNG or for the petrochemicals that we can actually use to increase our earnings, right? Which we, of course, we can implement in other areas. So the cost-benefit analysis has to do as well with some of the future things we are looking at. So, for example, you have things like carbon trading mechanism. So the other set of work. So everything goes hand in hand. For example, when you store carbon dioxide, there are now ways in which you can trade those internationally. So it's a combination of the impact on the environment and how you can reduce that. And we are saying that even though there might be a cost, basically you're doing it in order to preserve our well-being and life, right? And then as well, you have where you have new ways where you have a financial benefit in terms of reducing your carbon emissions. So all of that is what we are looking at. On the other side, what we have for the industry is that you have mechanisms that when you export, for example, in the EU, you have the carbon border adjustment mechanism, where basically if you don't produce cleaner fuels, you will have to pay, there's a cost to that, a tax, right, attached to that, or maybe you won't even be able to market your fuels. So by adopting some of these mechanisms, you are actually ensuring the sustainability of your industry. So it's not just a simple equation, because right now, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, we produce enough power to meet all of our needs without needing renewable energy. But as I said again, if we want to free up the natural gas molecules, if we want to go for a greener environment, then that's the incentive we are going for.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and it goes to a lot of our obligations as well. But, I mean, very simply put, and I know it's not as simple as the question, pertains to be, but for the listener outside there, the simple question is whether, in the transition towards these greener fuels, whether as a country we are going to be paying more by way of subvention, and or the consumer is going to be paying more.
So it depends again. So I'm giving that it depends.
So
it depends on the price of fuel, because part of I think what we were asked to consider is it depends on what's happening in the international environment in terms of fuel costs, right? So if, for example, we are so there are a number of things happening, as I would have mentioned. You may have to pay more if the cost of the components, and so, for example, in terms of your solar, goes up. But if, for example, there, as happened last year, there are very high energy prices. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, we, right now, and for our last how many decades, we have had fixed prices at the pump, right? And in terms of our electricity as well, we have had fixed rates. And with a number of the fuels, once the international prices crosses a certain amount, the government subsidizes so that the population does not have that impact. So based on where we are now, if we move to another type of regime where the prices move for the consumer with the international prices, then it may have more of an impact if we switch than if we don't, right? Because it's all relative. Sometimes, if for example, because some of the technologies are now emerging, so if in the first few years, if, for example, oil prices are very high, then it will give an incentive to move towards it may make renewable energy more reasonable, and you can use that. But if prices are low, then for us as Trinidad and Tobago, it may make sense, just off the dollars alone, I'm not talking about the environment, to stick with what we have. So it's not an easy equation. It's something that you have to keep monitoring. So what you have to do is adopt, which is why we spend a lot of time with a balanced approach, looking at all the different elements, because we have the subsidy on one hand, or which the consumer every day would not see, the changes in the prices. But if we change that system, then maybe there will be some trade-offs.
And you have a monitoring unit that looks at these things monthly?
Yes, we have.
And provides reports?
Yes, so we have our Energy Research and Planning Division, which looks at prices, and we have Ms. Nikki's division, Downstream Petroleum, and they look specifically at the cost of gasoline, all the fuels, as well as the usage. Okay. Right? So we monitor that constantly.
So final question, and it pertains to that as well. Do those reports come out, when they come out, do they indicate what is the impact to the consumer/taxpayer? That's one. And the second one is, do you also collect, or are you in possession of any information on the impact, whether it's a positive impact, no impact, or an adverse impact on the increase of our fuels, the removal of the subsidy and the increase on premium super diesel on our retail sectors, the input cost as well as the logistical cost? Are you in possession of those things? And do those reports that you're talking about, those monitoring reports, do they recommend or inform, the impact on the taxpayer/consumer?
So we work in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance, who ultimately the decision with respect to pricing, really. And so we work very closely with them in terms of supplying all the required information. So we produce reports, but also requests may come in terms of, we do sensitivity analysis, which will look at certain scenarios in terms of the cost of fuel internationally, the revenue to the country, and also the subsidy. So yes, so we do have that information being looked at on a day-to-day basis. The ministry subscribes to information, providers of information, such as Bloomberg and other types of information that will give us the type of data that we need to do that analysis. Yeah.
Anybody else? All right, so P.S., in the meantime, I wanted to find out, you had told us that, again, the draft renewable energy policy is being worked on, and you expected that the policy to be completed by the end of 2023. Has that been achieved? There were two things that we were told about the draft renewable energy policy, which was to be finalized in the fourth quarter of 2023, and also this feed-in tariff policy, which also was supposed to be completed at the fourth quarter of 2023. Where are we with both those policies?
So the feed-in tariff, it was sent to me for review, and there's some additional information which I thought would be necessary. So it's just being refined now to be submitted to Cabinet, right? But in effect, the policy was completed. It's just being refined to be submitted to Cabinet.
Might I ask what time frame you expect your submission to be?
I think it would be in February. We'll look at February.
All right.
The draft renewable energy policy, I know that was being developed in conjunction. We had a technical assistance for that, so I'll ask Mr. Bodo to just respond with respect to where that one is at.
Thank you.
Right, so the draft renewable energy policy was completed in December last year. The plan is to have a stakeholder review for it now, and actually letters are drafted today to be sent out to various stakeholders, including the Ministry of Public Utilities, TNTech, RIC, etc. So we hope to get the consultations done within a couple of months and then forward it to the executive for final review.
So that okay, I'm not seeing your name here, but excuse me. If you could give me, you said next couple of months, so what we're looking at, March? If you could give me a kind of time frame with respect to when, because you've sent it to your stakeholders. Have you given them a timeline to respond?
Right, so we are hoping to have our meetings in February. We are aware that's Carnival and what else. So I'm hoping to get back firm reviews by the end of February, beginning of March. Depending on how much changes we need to make, that will determine the final timelines.
All right. But what are you projecting? What are you projecting as your time frame?
So based on previous...
You may or you may not make it, but what are you projecting?
So based on previous policies, for example, the feed-in tariff that we spoke about, this could take anywhere between 3 months to 6 months.
Okay. So you are already looking like August?
Right.
And after that, that is when it goes to Cabinet, or is it 6 months, in August you expect to send it to Cabinet?
At 6 months, we review it with our executive, just to make sure there's any fine details need to be worked out, and then send it to Cabinet. Hopefully.
And that's why I ask you August, because August is outside the 6 month period. I give you 7.
Thanks, madam.
So you will let us know where you are in August.
Will
yes?
do.
Right. Would you like to ask anything, member?
Thanks, Chairman. I just have 2 simple questions. What is the status of the project at Piaco, the solar project at Piaco? And the reason I ask that, it has to do with public sensitization on what Ministry of Energy is doing. I gather, or from what we're hearing today, there's a lot of good stuff coming out in terms of alternative energy and so on. What is your public sensitization campaign look like in terms of your PR work as it relates to the good stuff that you're doing, and how do you get buy-in from the public as to what you're doing?
Greg, you want to take the project?
Right, so to start with the airport project. So the airport project, construction has been completed. There was an inspection with TNTech and the government electrical inspectorate, and there were some issues and they need to correct them. So those are being corrected right now, and the plan is to commission within the next month or two. They're working to get a license as well from the Ministry of Public Utilities, but the banner project is 90% complete, or maybe more than 90% complete.
And that is to use at the airport?
Yes, it will be
for use at the airport.
Sorry, yes, it will be used at the airport. I believe it's 5 to 7% of the electrical usage at the airport.
Okay.
So if I could just comment on the public awareness campaign. So for this year, in conjunction with the construction of the Project Lara, we have a public awareness campaign associated with that, as well as the consultants that were awarded the project. There's also were awarded for the national education and awareness. This is for the solar for the emergency shelters, as well as our own communications department will be doing public awareness. In addition, we have, in terms of the Ministry of Energy, some of our younger professionals are involved with some of the groups, the Society of Petroleum Engineers, and they have been, along with other groups, have been going out to schools on a regular basis together with our Renewable Energy Division to present on the energy sector, on renewable energy, on energy transition. And I don't have the number of schools that they would have visited, but they have done quite a lot. I was sent a video recently on it, but we can supply information. So we are doing the public awareness, and especially for the schools and so on, in a lot of different ways, and we'll be continuing for 2024.
All right. Thank you, Pierce. Madam Chair, just a follow-up on the solar farm at Tobago. You said it's 5 to 7% of the airport usage, right? Is that all that the farm will be able to generate, or is it that the airport is only taking 5 to 7% of electricity from the solar farm?
Right. So that is the entire capacity of the farm at this moment. So it would not be connected directly to the grid. So the electricity would be used on site at the airport. There are plans to actually double capacity there, but that would be a second phase.
So does that require additional acreage, or could that space where you are generate more than the 5 to 7%?
Right. So I'm not sure if I'm talking out the line here, but the Airports Authority have said that they have enough space, that they will be looking perhaps at carports, so the existing parking area to go rooftop rather than on the ground as is now.
Okay. No. What I was asking is if where you are in terms of the existing farm, if that space could accommodate additional, because if you could explain to us, how do you generate more electricity? So how do you move that farm from 5 to 7% to maybe, let's say, 25% of the airport usage?
Right. So if there's currently 100 panels installed, you have to double that and install 200 panels. So you need that amount of square footage again.
Okay.
In terms of the cost-benefit analysis, in terms of I think it says only 5%. How does that work? Because how much is the expenditure?
So we haven't done a full cost benefit analysis, but it was grant funded. So the cost of the taxpayers is zero. So I guess it's definitely going to be benefit the airport.
Oh, so, okay, 5% is how much we saving?
Right, I don't. Yeah, I don't have that figure in front of me, but I can send it to you.
Okay, and while you said there was no cost to the taxpayer, I mean, if we didn't do a cost-benefit analysis, how we know even accepting the funding could have gone to something else? I don't know.
Right, sorry, I misspoke there. So I don't have the figures in front of me, but there was a full project document. So I'm sure there would have been a cost-benefit analysis inside there. Again, you could pull that out and send it to you.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you. And member, yes, please, member Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question really has to do with, while we're looking at green energy and blue energy, what might be the cost to the environment to produce that? And whether we've considered the cost of that, the long-term cost of that.
And are you, if I could just ask, if you're comparing it to mean, are you talking to business as usual, meaning if we don't change anything, what the cost will be versus if we change? Is that what you're asking?
Well, no, actually, given that we're looking at transitioning, have we considered what the environmental costs would be? Because some of the research shows that to produce green energy or to produce blue energy, there's conversely does not, it produces fugitive methane just from preliminary readings. So my question is, have we considered the long-term environmental impact of transitioning?
So that is something that is ongoing. The thing about it is that based on which is why I spoke about the business as usual, because if, for example, in terms of fugitive methane emissions, that is something that is another aspect that, for example, the National Gas Company and Heritage is looking at, where they're using the satellite technology to be able to identify where you have fugitive emissions so that they can address it. So there are a lot of different moving parts. Another point with respect to the long-term cost is that a lot of these technologies are now emerging. A lot of them are not commercial anywhere in the world. So while a lot of research is being done, the long-term impact to the environment, which I get the impression you're talking about negative impact as well, is not even fully understood as well. It's now being. So what we know is really the positive impact of avoiding the CO2 or reducing the CO2. But some of what you're referring to is actually an area of research right now, which we have to continue to monitor. And so we don't have the full answer, but that is part of what will be important in terms of our approach going forward. That is a very, very good and relevant point. Yeah.
So, P.S., if I just want to look at page 6 of your submission, just to get some clarification on this, where we're talking about the custom duties and so on. In terms of this, the submission is more or less saying that in terms of moving towards cleaner modes of transport, certain mechanisms were put in place. All right, so for instance, the removal of all the custom duties and motor vehicle tax and value-added tax on the importation of battery-powered vehicles and so on, which was implemented in January 1st, 2022, to be reviewed in 2 years. Where are we with that?
So it was implemented. What we have to get now is the data back in terms of how much of that, and again, it's in conjunction with some of the other ministries. We would need to get the info from them in terms of how much, what the total amounts were, and so on. So that is something, an analysis that we still have to do.
So we don't know, we have no idea of whether employing this strategy produced any result in reducing our carbon footprint, or any data that could make us project, if we continued with this, what effect it would have.
What I'm saying is that I don't have results of that here today, but that's an analysis that will be done during this quarter, which is what we're saying. It will be reviewed after 2 years. So it's not that it's not done, because you have, it's in conjunction with a number of different things, right? You have, because you have to compare where you are at in terms of the number of vehicles, the age, and all of that, the type of emissions you would have versus which are totally new vehicles versus those who would, where they would have switched, right? Because you would have an increase in the amount of vehicles being purchased and so on. So what I'm saying is that that analysis, it still has to be done. It's not that we don't have the data, but those things will have to be collated. And the Ministry of Works and Transport will have quite a lot of that data.
Okay. So you expect that the review, which you said would have been done after 2 years, you expect that that review should be done within this first quarter?
Yes, we will look at it.
And therefore, we'd ask if you would share the results of that then. And I guess, would I be correct in also concluding that the effect or the efficacy of the measure of removal of the taxes, the waiver of the taxes on hybrids, the same kind of analysis of the efficacy of that is something also to be reviewed?
Yes, but this is in conjunction with Ministry of Finance. So, for example, we had a team which worked, was that in 2022 as well, with the EVs, with the electric vehicles. Yeah, so there was an initial report which would have been done at the time that some of the measures were recommended by a technical team, which was headed by Ms. Fraser here within the ministry at the time. So what will be done now is a follow-up to that initial report. Yeah.
So follow-up will show whether those sorts of projections have been achieved and where we go from here.
Yes, but just to note that what we would have produced before would have been recommendations, because what we do the analysis and we would provide recommendations to the Ministry of Finance. Ultimately, what is implemented now is what we're saying. We would now have to look back, which may not have been fully, it may be phased in and so on.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that we have an initial set of body of technical work that was done, and the follow-up to that will be done. Yeah.
All right. And again, all I'm concerned about timelines. That is first quarter of 2024.
Yes, we'll do that analysis before the end of March.
Okay, thank you very much. So I guess we could always come back to the Ministry of Energy and just trying to ensure that we get everybody in the conversation, so that I guess we could go on to the Ministry of Works, because we've kind of been skirting it in terms of when we were speaking with the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries and PS. I guess the initial question I'd ask with respect to the public transportation and reducing the emissions by the 30%. Okay, where are we with that in terms of looking at public transportation?
As it relates to public transportation, the major trust is under the PTSC. We are seeking to increase the fleet of buses under the PTSC. The numbers are in the vicinity of 300, and they are in the main to be electric buses. The tender has gone out for that, and the responses are in, and evaluations are being undertaken.
Okay, so that in terms of acquiring the 300, I guess that would be on a phased approach. Yes?
Yes, it would be. There is one tender that has gone out, of course, but in terms of how it comes back in, yes, it will be on a phased approach.
Mm-hmm. Any at all, and I might be pushing the envelope here, would any at all be considered within fiscal 2023, 2024?
Well, yes, Chair, you're pushing the envelope a little bit. It's a bit. It really depends on the finalization of the tender, the timing, because that will then lead to the whole question of the delivery and implementation process.
So, and again, we're looking at public transportation, and in the submission, I found that there was some very interesting statements that, maybe I could get some clarification on. And I'm particularly looking at pages 5 and 6 of the submission. Because initially, the submission would have spoken to the effects that increases in transportation costs should have on persons. And I looked at the entity of public transportation and the increasing fuel prices. And when they would say something like this, maybe you could, that the rise in fuel prices has not significantly impacted the operational profits of PTSC. If we could get some explanation of that statement.
I do have the PTSC GM here, but let me just make an opening salvo. The question of operational profits of PTSC speaks to PTSC making profits. The fare structure of PTSC has not really been changed since the 1990s. Mm-hmm. So what may be a clearer statement is that the rise would have had some impact on the operational costs for PTSC, taking into consideration that the majority of their fleet now is related to CNG and diesel, and not necessarily petrol as well. Okay. But if you want further elaboration, I can. I'm sure the PTSC GM can give you details.
Okay, so in light of that, because to me, those responses by PTSC, and I'm talking in terms of operational costs, the bus procurement, fleet management, maintenance costs, we would like some clarification on that, because they do talk with respect to the rises in fuel prices, but none of those things appear to have had any impact on the PTSC. So it's either that there have been strategies, because they haven't said how come, and one would assume that there are impacts. What one doesn't want to think is because there's a subvention, nobody looks at what impacts are. Okay, so that maybe in respect of those responses, which are to question 4 and are covered on page 5 and page 6, if PSU could undertake to get from the GM of PTSC some clarification that could assist the committee. Okay, thank you. I invite any other member who would like to ask a question with respect to the submission from the Ministry of Works and Transport? DGM is here? So I didn't realize that. So PSC passed on to DGM.
No, that's what I said, Chair.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, I thought you probably wanted it in writing, and I was.
No. I didn't realize
happily.
DGM was here. So I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Sorry. Because I looked at saw the name, but I'm hearing you say that he's not there. But if DGM is there, certainly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The issues of the impact on the costs would have been impacted really because of the composition of the fleet. We have about 20% CNG in our daily operational fleet. That price did not change over the period. And we have about 80% diesel, and that price changed smaller than in terms of super and premium. So the impact, yes, there was an increase and there was impact, but it wasn't as significant in terms of PTSC and public transportation, right, as it would be for the general public using petrol. Yeah.
So even with that small impact, and I think it would be negative, yes, are there any strategies that you would have employed with respect to reducing it or plotting your way forward?
Surely, we have a number of internal processes that we have looked at with respect to ensuring that we control the cost overall of fuel. We have introduced simply things like an idling policy. How long you have buses idling and not being driven. It is sometimes in the past they would have left buses for hours idling, doing nothing. So we have policies internally that would have addressed those factors in terms of emissions and in terms of cost. We also would have looked at a rationalization of our routes to ensure that we use these buses efficiently. We use them on high ridership routes to maximize the use of everything in terms of wear and tear on the bus, in terms of the fuel, etc. So there was some rationalization over the last, let's say, 5 years with respect to that. In certain areas, we are unable to use the CNG, rural areas, because of the infrastructure support. So we have to use the diesel, but we try to use CNG in built-up areas and on the main trunk routes as far as possible.
Thank you so much, Mr. GM, and I therefore now invite any member of the committee who would wish to pose any questions on this submission. Yes, Member Hislop.
Thank you, Chair. And this is, I guess, to the GM, Madam Chair. We treating with cost to the public. Two questions I have. What plans does PTSC have for PTSC to become more attractive as an alternative? And the other question, well, you could answer that one first, and then I'll ask the other one.
Well, PTSC over the years, member, has been focusing on customer satisfaction. We have looked at upgrading not only our facilities. We have done that throughout the East-West corridor in terms of our transit malls, in terms of the Pedestrian depot. San Fernando we have a number of projects running there to make the facilities itself more attractive. We have also embarked on ensuring that our buses, our old fleet, aging fleet, but nevertheless undergo preventative maintenance to avoid shutdowns, which is something that impacts the customers. But one of the major limiting factors has been the age of the fleet as well as the size of the fleet, and that is where the acquisition of the 300 buses comes in. Once we have, in our surveys, we have found that the public generally looks at reliability and they want on-time, right? On-time performance. So with a larger fleet, you have greater reliability, and with a larger fleet, you can run more frequent services, which will allow people to then consider switching. There's some economics in it too. At the moment, we have ridership that is loyal to the PTSC simply based on the economics. It's cost effective for them. But in the future, we are looking at park and ride, where multimodal hubs will allow persons to leave their cars and utilize public transportation. But a larger fleet is key to that.
Outside of a larger fleet, you spoke to reliability, GM. What is the biggest challenge you have in the lovely island of Tobago?
Tobago, there are a number of issues that we face in Tobago. There's some terrain issues in terms of the terrain there. We have found that has some impact on the maintenance costs, higher maintenance costs for the vehicles, particularly running the Lance for Me, Charlottesville routes. That has impacted in terms of the wear and tear on the gears, the clutches on the buses. One of the major issues we have right now is the issue of the CNG reliability. There is a plant there, and it from time to time goes down. When it goes down, those buses are rendered out of service. So that is something that we are working with NGC CNG to address. We have a very close working relationship with them to ensure reliability of that plant. But when it goes down, it's something that affects the service.
I remember a few years ago, in Tobago, they used the maxi-size buses on those two particular routes that you highlighted, the Charlottesville and the Lansome route. And there has been, in conversations with some of your operators in Tobago, there has been a desire for PTSC to consider reintroducing that size of bus, because I could tell you that I have used your service to Charlottesville on a couple of occasions. I have a very good friend who is an operator, and it is the route into Charlottesville is not for the faint-hearted on a PTSC bus of that size. So I don't know if there has been consideration, and I will. If there isn't, that maybe you can look at reintroducing a smaller size on those routes to help.
Sure, it's something that I will take back to the board. We use some of the smaller buses. We use what we call the HSDs on those routes, which is a high-gas small diesel bus, 33-seater. It's one of the smallest in the fleet. But you find you have to balance that. If you have a large number, you can run them more regularly. We have found that when even that bus is not enough to carry the capacity that is the demand into Charlottesville, because a lot of citizens from Charlottesville and Lance for Me depend on those buses going in and out of those areas.
Right. And my final question is in terms of your fare structure. I know this may be a little dicey, but has PTSC considered adjusting its fare structure, and how is that done?
That is not solely up to PTSC. Clearly, subsidization of public transportation is a policy, right? And that is a policy issue. Just for the committee, the subvention we got this year was 288.5 million, right, with respect to it. And obviously that has an impact. So the fare structure, we will have an input, we could recommend and so on, but that decision is at a higher level.
Okay, Member Mitchell.
One question to Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Works. You may not have, I don't think you may have the information now, but just for the committee's assistance, could you get some information for us from the licensing office showing, because we want to see the correlation between the purchase of new cars or imported used cars, the licensing, in before the rise in the fuel prices in 2022 and in 2023. Let's see if there's a correlation there. And of course, disaggregate it as you have here between the CNG, diesel and CNG, electric, petrol and electric, petrol and CNG, petrol alone. Please. Mm-hmm.
Yes, Chair. I will take the information we have here and disaggregate in terms of imported used as against new. Yeah?
No, not as against new. Both. So what we're trying to find is how many persons have purchased cars, notwithstanding the rise in fuel prices. How many persons have purchased vehicles?
Yes.
If there is a drop, or if it's remained constant, or in fact, if it has increased, and we want to see it in relation to the increase prior to 2022, when it was 497, the increase in April of 2022, when it increased to 597, and I'm talking super here, and in September 2022, when it increased again to 697. So that's what we're trying to get.
Okay,
yeah.
Understood.
And then, of course, disaggregated the type of fuel vehicle that consumers have purchased. Please.
Will do.
Minister?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I just wanted to, PS, if there's a consideration by the Ministry of Works as it relates to the usage of high occupancy vehicle lanes throughout our major highways to also assist with the idea of carpooling and moving a greater capacity of persons at one time.
Yes, Member, that is actually a study we are doing with the IDB at this point in time.
P.S., I just wanted to find out, in terms of the submission, there was a table on page 4, which showed the vehicles according to fuel types, which have been purchased 2022, 2023. And there seems to have been some sort of movement in patterns in terms of between 2022 and 2023, maybe roughly about 3,000 more hybrid vehicles using petrol and electric were purchased. But we also observed that in terms of the other combinations, petrol and CNG, petrol and diesel, there wasn't any significant impact. And based on the submission from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, what we've been told is that a good alternate fuels is also a good decarbonization pathway. So I'm trying now, in light of that, to find out if there are any strategies, mechanisms being considered by the Ministry of Works and Transport to encourage persons to look at the other types of hybrids, petrol and CNG, petrol and diesel, to cut down on the number of vehicles using petrol alone.
Yes, Chair. Now, the table that you speak of, as you rightly said, it does show overall there's an increase in the actual number of vehicles purchased, but that increase has substantially been borne under the hybrid and we assume it is based on what has been provided to the general public. The ministry has not actively identified strategies for the movement, but it is something that we can discuss further with the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Finance. Chair.
Member Patisa?
Just a question out of curiosity: what is an intelligent public transport solution, and is that being considered because of rising costs, or is it for effective transport?
I will pass this on to the GM of PTSC, at least I get myself into.
Yes, member. The intelligent public transport system is really leveraging technology to gather the data and analyze it to make better decisions. So it deals with issues like scheduling, it deals with issues like ridership, and having all the data being able to be processed quickly. Right now we have a number of, we have data that is collected manually and then analyzed by persons. What you can find with the IPTS is that data is analyzed quicker, is available to everybody, and it then becomes available to the public. So the public can get information on scheduling, they can get information on bus on time, bus departures, location of the bus, etc. So it's really the leveraging of technology to better enhance the service delivered by PTSC and to enhance the customer service experience.
Member Mitchell?
Just to piggyback on that question, well, we've been hearing for the longest time, I mean, in committees like this, that, PTSC will finally come with an app that will make the service more attractive by enhancing the predictability of the service, so that a customer could just look, see when their bus is coming, and program their journey in line with that predictability that is there. When is that technology that you're talking about going to finally come?
That technology is part of the ITPS system and part of the acquisition. That was a significant part of the tender. Mm-hmm. At the moment, what we utilize is really social media.
But when will it come? I mean, we highly anticipating this. I mean, I think your ridership will increase, where you will definitely need the additional buses. But when will it actually come?
Well, it will come in tandem with the buses. So we're looking at over the next 2-year projection, 2-year time projection.
Because it might be a simple thing as just putting a GPS system and linking it into an app. I mean, I'm no expert, but, so over the next 2 years in phases, we expect that to be implemented.
Yeah. Islam?
So I don't want to seem as if we're belaboring the point, but is it that, so over this 2-year period, is it that some buses will be able to be on the system, and some, if you're saying that the buses that are coming with the system, so what about the serviceable buses that will still be in the system? How would they integrate into this? So if you put an older bus on a route, is it that if I stand with my app, I'm not going to see it coming?
Well, that was part of the system, that the older buses have to be integrated in with the newer buses. So that was part of the tender requirement. So we're saying GM over a 2-year period.
Yes. And I think it's disappointing from my perspective as a citizen that this technology has been out there for so long, and that we've been struggling to implement it in Trinidad and Tobago. I want to side with my member colleague. What is preventing, or what has prevented us as or PTSC or as a nation from getting to that point?
You haven't.
And in terms of integrating everything, so is there a plan for us to integrate PTSC service and NIDCO's water taxi service, so that if I leave home, if I'm in San Fernando and I leave home, right, so I have to get into Port of Spain, I leave home, I say I'm going to get a 6 o'clock or a 4 o'clock bus, it's coming at this time, I'm going to the water taxi terminal in San Fernando, I'm sure that I could purchase my ticket. I'm purchasing my ticket for the bus, for the water taxi online, so that when I get on the bus, I know I'm already booked for the water taxi, come up the road, take another bus to another destination in Port of Spain. Are we looking at something like that?
So, member, I will, yes. What you're speaking about is interoperability, and yes, we are looking at something like that. We're looking at it in terms of the PTSC, the water taxi, and hopefully also the ferry service.
What kind of time frame are we looking at, PS?
At this time, we have initial study being done with the IDB. Out of that, we will get a better time frame. The question of interoperability, it sounds simple, but it is actually very complex because it speaks to the purchase of the ticketing system, funding, etc., for all three entities. I can say that the initial review that we're doing with the IDB will be finished by the end of this financial. In terms of implementation, I would not be able to give you a specific date because each phase calls for decision making and financial implications.
Okay, so again, this is directed to PTSC, and maybe we could be advised where you all are with these this multimodal public transportation hub that is planned for Tobago, and also the bus depot at Factory Road, Shogunas. Where you are with that?
We have initially done, in terms of Taruba, we have done some surveys. We have been working with the Commissioner of State Lands with respect to having those lands assigned. There was some changes recently, but surveys have been done of the portion, and we await. It has to go to Cabinet to vest the land.
Oh, so these are state lands?
Yep. Yes, it is, ma'am.
All right. So it means that this is still some way off then?
Yes, ma'am.
What you project as a date for even startup?
For startup?
Yeah.
I would say we would go out for RFPs with respect to design. We're looking at 2024, and thereafter, from that we can then move to the construction phase.
So you will do design even though the lands are not vested?
Well, we await that, and that is in a fairly advanced state. It is already by the Commissioner of State Lands to go forward, and surveys have been done of the portion of land. So we expect that to come in short order. Once that occurs, then we can go out for tenders.
Okay. All right. So to talk about even completion, that's pie in the sky because we don't even have designers yet. Yes? I'll be correct?
We don't have the designers yet.
All right. Okay, fine. Where are we with this establishment of this bus depot at Factory Road?
Factory Road, at the moment, we are undertaking some fencing of the area. We have those lands assigned, and we have started fencing the property. So if you pass through there, you would see some fencing going on, which is demarcating, and then from there we proceed on.
So you have a design for the bus depot, or it's just a place that buses go in? You just have to pave it and buses just go there and park?
No, it will be a multimodal hub, including passenger terminal,
yes,
some park and ride facilities, and dispatching of the bus, as well as some engineering capability.
Okay, I could see people smiling when they hear park and ride. Okay, so give me an idea time frame.
Well, that
with
one
the park
is,
and ride.
Well, that one is a little more advanced, and we expect that to go faster. So we are looking probably this year to start some sort of construction at that location.
You have a budget for that? That's in your budget?
Not as yet, no.
Okay. And I guess you don't even have an idea of what your startup work costs will be, or do you?
Not at this stage, not at this stage.
All right, so that telling me 2024 might be ultra optimistic. I don't even have to tell me.
It might be optimistic, but
not ultra.
Not ultra, but we have set some timelines in which to process forward.
Okay, so let me ask the PS, in terms of funding, this would come, does PTSC have its own funding for this, or it has to come through you?
It has to come through the
all right, so are there any funds identified for this?
At this point in time, no, we do not have funds identified.
Okay, all right, thank you. And the last thing, PTSC, the passenger facility at Rio Claro, is that in the same state with Taruba and Shogunas?
We have identified the area. We had some issues with occupants on the premises.
Mm-hmm.
We have dealt at great degree with that, and we have fenced the property. That project of fencing and demarcating the property is ongoing as we speak.
So these lands are vested in you?
Yes.
Yes? And the squatters have been removed? All?
Most.
Most?
We do have some issues with persons who may enter it from time to time, but we are actively evicting people as we speak.
All right, so you have nobody really permanently there?
No.
You have like trespassers, but you don't have anybody?
Yeah, from time to time they come onto the compound.
Okay, so what sorts of steps do you take to prevent that? I'm not talking about the post facto steps to remove. What sorts of steps you're taking to prevent people coming? You think the fencing alone will do it?
Well, we haven't fenced the entire area.
Yes.
We are moving to place security on the location, permanent security presence there. We did not have that before.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the things that will come as we go forward to prevent reincursion onto the premises.
Okay, so having fenced and prevented new trespassers, what sort of, this is also multimodal?
Yes, smaller facility, but yes.
Smaller facility. And there's no likelihood that this will happen in fiscal 2024?
I don't foresee that, no.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, so Member Patterson, is there anything you'd like to ask? All right, thank you. And I wanted to ask, and P.S., this is for you, and with respect to developing a sustainable transportation system, I've seen that one of the things you all had spoken of is with respect to the use of biking as a mode of mobility. What are the plans for this? Because, you know, every year we all cry when many of our friends become corpses for recreational cycling. Far less now we're talking as a sustainable form of transportation. What are the plans for this?
It's interesting that you put those two things together because they're very related in terms of road safety and the utilization of forms of transportation such as cycling. We have done projects so far around the Savannah as well as in Carnage. And the intention is to continue to identify areas with the least risk of incursion for bicycles, as well as discussions with municipal corporations to identify inner city areas where this can also be utilized. A lot of it is in discussion phase, but that is how we are planning to approach the increase in the utilization of.
Okay, so with respect to, and you had mentioned shagaramas, you know, I see shagaramas as recreational and not really as part of a transportation network. But even in terms of learning from what we've done in shagaramas, have there been any learnings with respect to road surface and that sort of thing? Because I'm not a cyclist, but a lot of them complain about the type of surface.
I shouldn't say that I'm not a cyclist either, but I'm aware that in terms of the type of road servicing, I can't say categorically that we have had a number of any major complaints in terms of what we have put down as the road surface. And I think that could be one of the issues, because maybe we need to have better feedback mechanisms. So taking that into consideration, we will identify a way of getting better feedback mechanisms from the major stakeholders and users.
And therefore, also, what are we doing to sensitize our road using public with respect to cyclists, if we are looking at cycling as an alternate mode? Because, I mean, I think it was last year or year before, we all know of the death of a well-known cyclist.
Yes.
Around the savannah. So, you know, those kinds of models, I would love to ride to work, but I'm not sure I'm going to do that in Trinidad and Tobago, even if there were lanes. How are we sensitizing our road use in public?
That sensitization is all part of the sensitization process that and the education process that we are seeking to initiate under the National Road Safety Council of Trinidad and Tobago. Inside of that work program exists a program for overall road safety sensitization, but there is an aspect specific to cyclists. That has been going on by certain groups, Arrive Alive, etc. But under the council, we are placing that into our communication plan. The first aspect of which, and we're hoping to, dare I say it, we're hoping to roll it out this first quarter, is education campaign to schools and start that process there.
Any plans for that to be in our improved in our regulations? I see regulations in terms of tests, and so you'll have published changes in that. What about that aspect with respect to the regulations that examination that drivers have to sit?
Well, I do have the Transport Commissioner here. I do know that it's not something I've seen at this point, but we are constantly seeking to review the legislation. But I will let the Transport Commissioner further elaborate.
Please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, and thank you very much, PS, for allowing me the opportunity. Yes, Chair, we are mindful of the fact of making modifications to our regulations, especially for Class 3. First-time drivers, most times we find they seek to ascertain their first license under Class 3. So we have issued our first piece of document recently where we modify the entire exam, which we know have not been touched for a number of years, especially to deal with some of the new laws and so forth we have within our environment, as the demerit points, the fixed penalty system, etc. More importantly, we are looking at safety specific to cycling, because this is what I need to talk to. We are looking carefully in the context of what is happening, as PS mentioned, with our National Road Safety Council and some of those new initiatives to come on board. And we have given the commitment, I have also given the commitment, the licensing authority, to continue to make changes where necessary to our existing regulations as it relates to driving time to time. And we are hoping to do so again within the next year or two based on how things develop.
Okay, so that even in terms of sensitization, so that was regulations, in terms of sensitization, is there anything planned for both drivers and cyclists to bring awareness with respect to improve safety for cyclists?
I want to basically capitalize on the point that PS made a while ago. I know I also sit on the National Road Safety Council. I know there's a massive plan to ramp up communications in all aspects of safety, and therefore I can give the commitment that we will be looking at treating with that for the cyclists also, and for the drivers in the context of safety for cyclists.
Yeah, but remember now, we're not just talking about cyclists. We're looking
Yes.
at, if we're talking about bicycling being an alternate mode of transportation, it means that people have an option of leaving their car home and cycling to work. So it has to be a little more comprehensive than what is done for like sport or cycling, and therefore that's what I'm concerned about. And you know, a kind of chicken and egg. Do we wait till we establish cycling lanes for people to cycle and then do the public awareness? Or if we start from ahead of time, bringing that kind of awareness, so that by the time we establish these lanes, or however you intend to introduce bicycling as an alternate mode, that people already have almost automatically the awareness of what you do.
Yeah, and thank you,
How we
Chair.
intend to approach that.
Yeah, again, though, as I mentioned, in the context of communication and our awareness program, we intend to start, as PS mentioned, within the first quarter of this year. And as Commissioner says on the committee, I will give my commitment to ensure that we seek to start that level of awareness for cycling now within that first quarter.
But
even
PS said
before.
schools, if I remembered well.
Oh yes, but while we I'm glad you mentioned that though, because while we look at schools, we are also looking at the content that will in turn benefit both the schools, the children, and the general public. So we think we'll see a twofold benefit.
And PS, I also saw in the submission, which I find really interesting too, that the traffic management branch will be introducing measures to promote pedestrian safety, and this plan about one street in every municipality being dedicated for pedestrian movement. Sounds nice.
We have great hopes, you know.
It sounds nice.
It is. I do. That's why I have the head of the traffic management branch with me today, because it is an area, and I'm just stepping back a little bit to the whole cycling matter as well, and the statement that really we are seeking to really have these discussions with the corporations, because we understand, and the same thing in terms of the pedestrian areas. So for instance, for cycling, we understand that really you have to, for you to cycle to work, it's really in municipalities, more or less. You're not going to be cycling on the highway to work. You're going to be cycling in local roads, etc. And so that's why we want to have that sort of stakeholder consultation. Once again, in terms of the having a roadway dedicated for pedestrian, same thing, municipalities comes into play. And in terms of pedestrian awareness and utilization, it's even wider than that one road, and I'll let the head of the traffic management branch speak to it.
Thank you, PS. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. We're on the issue of road safety. The Ministry of Works and Transport, we are in the process of finalizing a national road safety plan. And within that road safety plan is pegged to United Nations of their decade of action to reduce road fatalities by 50% before 2030. We have been successful from the last decade. With this decade, for the last couple of months, Ministry of Works and Transport have been engaged in extensive consultation with developing that national road safety plan, which also includes what we speak about with cyclists. On the finalization of the National Road Safety Plan, we have to go to Cabinet to also agree with the plan, hence the reason why we are doing consultation. And then we will approach the municipalities for them to do their necessary consultation in order to have these roads, one road dedicated for pedestrian movement. This is in an effort to reduce the pedestrian and vehicular conflict that we face on a day-to-day basis. In addition to that, the Traffic Management Branch through the Ministry of Works and Transport, we have been increasing pedestrian facilities throughout the entire country through the use of traffic signals, ensuring that all traffic signals have pedestrian facilities available to prevent the conflicts that take place between the vehicles and the pedestrians. And also we have an initiative to start this fiscal year at Citygate, where it's an extremely busy area where pedestrians cross, to have an all-stop operation of the traffic signals where all vehicles will stop to allow the pedestrians to cross. So that study was already completed, is ready for implementation. So we want to target when the school traffic is significantly reduced to implement it. So by the July-August vacation, we'll start implementing that in this fiscal year.
Thank you so much. So that is with respect to the All Stop at Citygate, right? With respect to the national road safety plan that you're speaking about and the consultations, do you have a time frame for your consultations, your initial rounds of consultations to be completed?
Yes. Chair, we've completed 90% of the stakeholder groups in December for the National Road Safety Council.
Right.
I think just this month we may have one more rounds of consultation before we go to cabinet in this before this for the first quarter of this year, because we're trying to complete that road safety plan in this first quarter of this year. So we've completed 90% of the stakeholder consultations.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that, because I got from you, and I might have been mistaken, that there are two rounds. All right, so when you tell me you've completed 90%, you're already in your second round of consultations?
Sorry, in the first rounds.
Of your first round?
Yes.
So you anticipate that between now and March, you would have completed 100% of your first rounds and 100% of your second round. Am I understanding it well?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we will complete both rounds before the end of first quarter of this year.
I would really appreciate that for the benefit of the public of Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so but we'll see how that goes. And PS, I don't know if it's you or if it's this PTSC or the Transport Commissioner could tell us something more about the checkered band system for rural communities. What is this? Where we at? I saw that we were in consultation stages. Where we at with that? So first, what it is,
yes,
and then where we are with it.
The checkered band system, it's really an initiative to address what we call the first and the last mile, in that we understand that we have a fairly decent transportation system within the trunk areas. So you can get from along the east-west corridor, you can get north-south, but you do have challenges when you start speaking to some of the more rural extremities. So in that instance, there was a submission and a recommendation by the Maxi Taxi Association and other entities for the development of a rural checkered band system, which would address specifically these routes. So we've identified specific so-called rural routes where we are seeking to undertake a checkered band maxi taxi system. The consultations in respect of that is also approximately 90% completed, in that we have one more consultation to undertake in for the Shagona Central area, and then after that, the matter is going to be taken to cabinet in terms of the timeline and the processes for implementation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully sometime in the first half of this year, you should be able to get your note to cabinet, and you have no control after that, but certainly in terms of what you have to do.
Yes.
Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay. Member Hisab?
Just to follow up on the checkered band system, Madam Chair. Is there any consideration for that system to be used in certain areas in Tobago to supplement your the bus service? And when you say checkered, you're looking at what size of vehicle, the maxi size vehicles? Is that what you're looking at?
Size being envisaged as the smaller maxis.
Right. So is there any consideration, we go back to the same Charlottesville-Lansome issue, is there any consideration for that to be considered as a supplement to the bus service for those areas in Tobago?
It is not something that is envisaged at this point in time in this first rounds, but it is something that can be explored.
Sometimes I feel Tobago is always in the second rounds.
but just to say that that statement that I've just made is based on consultations with the Maxi Taxi Association, which includes the Tobago arm of the Maxi Taxi Association. Just to say.
Thank you, Piers. That's a nice comeback.
Members, anything else you all would like to post in the Ministry of Works and Transport before? Yes, Member Esther.
Just quickly, Chairman. In terms of I don't know if we asked it, in terms of the current PTSC fleet, operational and non-operational, you could share that information with us now or in writing? All right, thank you.
We'll provide it in writing, member.
Again, for PTSC, Jim, if you could give us an idea of, because you say you continue to maintain your existing 79 routes. Apart from the checkered band system that the PS spoke about, which is not really PTSC, but I guess it will work in tandem with you all, are there any plans to increase routes? And in addition to which, what factors do you use to determine maintaining a route or creating a new route?
In terms of the routes, there are 163 routes that have already been established. Once resources allow, we can increase accordingly. What do we use to maintain? We use ridership figures generally to look at the routes that we use that to get down to the 79 routes, and we would have analyzed those ridership figures in terms of the demographics of persons that use those routes. So we look at school children in uniform, elderly persons, and so on. We track that kind of data. We also maintain, in the 79, there were routes that we considered important, rural areas that depend heavily on public transportation. So the Blanchishes route is one that comes to mind. The Guayagari route is another. These are routes that citizens depend heavily on the public transportation and the benefit of the cost of public transportation in those areas. So that is what we use to determine the routes we keep.
You told me, Jim, you have 136 established routes.
163.
163 established routes.
Yeah, that was... Yeah.
Okay? Of that 163, it's only 79 you operate?
We operate in 79 at this point in time.
Yes. And what's the reason for the others not being operated?
Limitation of resources.
Fleet. And drivers and so, or just fleet?
We have, with an increased fleet, we will need drivers, but we do have drivers right now to undertake other routes. But we
not
do
the whole
have a
163,
limitation.
But additional to the 79?
Yeah, additional. But we have a limitation in fleet.
Fleet.
Yeah.
So the additional 300, I think, that the PS spoke about, first is 500 overall, but 300 to start with, if I remember well.
It's 300 new in the fleet, and 200 of the old fleet, bringing us up to 500.
Okay, so with this 300 that you're targeting, would you be able to operate your 163 established routes or only a 79?
No, the 300 will bring us back up to bring back those routes back online to the 163.
All right. And I guess if you don't know how you acquire, when you're acquiring the 300, you can't tell me when the 163 routes will be operational.
It depends.
Guys, do you have a sort of roadmap for the phases? Whether you reach it or not is a different thing. But do you have that?
The initial roadmap for the phases was first phase by the middle, the second quarter to third quarter of this year. By the end of the year, in first quarter next year, the second phase, and then the end of 2025 for the third phase.
Okay.
That was the initial roadmap.
And that will show the numbers being acquired and the routes that will become operational?
Yes.
Could you share that with us, please?
Sure.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody else has anything else for Ministry of Works and Transport? Okay, so that we could share the light and the love. I think we could move on to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and I will move to Member Mitchell to start that discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. To the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. So, as a part of your core mandate, you are responsible for generally the social safety nets, and in particular, assisting the poor and indigent. So, just by way of clarification, in your submission, you indicated that you used a poverty line of $1,439.02 per month of income, I suppose, per adult equivalent to determine benefits when utilizing your standard means test. Could you just explain that a little more or a little better for us?
Through you, Chair, thank you for that question. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, in doing our standards mean test for our clients or person who would apply for grants at the ministry, have to set a line that we use as the poverty line. Now, while this figure is utilized presently, this is not a true reflection of what the poverty line is in the country. Our ministry depends on input from CSO to determine what our poverty line would be. Presently, we are utilizing figures that are 2011, I believe, we're utilizing. And this would have been based on using the basket that CSO would usually use and looking at what the current prices were at in 2011. That being said, these figures are really outdated. And while we utilize that to be able to determine some level of where our clients are and to provide some assistance, it is not really a figure that reflects reality. That being said, I will ask one of my team members who would better be able to speak to what the poverty line is. I'll ask Dr. Raymond to give us a little insight into what is the poverty line and how this is utilized by our ministry also. What are some of the challenges we have right now with what we have available to us?
But before we go there, I want to know, we want to know, how did you get to 1,439? I know you're saying 2011, but in your submission, you're indicating that the poverty line was developed by inflating
Yes.
a 2005 official national poverty line using 2016 food prices. So in 2005, how was this poverty line determined? And what method do you use in terms of the 2016 food prices? I guess you're saying that the basket of goods, you use that as some type of multiplicand and you get to this figure.
Okay, so through you, Chair, the 2005 figure that we speak to, that would have been the last information we got from CSO as far as I remember. Okay, and the basket that would have been utilized at that entity is what our ministry would have used. But I'll ask my team member to be more specific. Okay? I'm asking Dr. Raymond to assist me here.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Chair. Just to build on what DPS would have mentioned, we rely on the information concerning the construction of our poverty line from the CSO, our Central Statistical Office. And the poverty line is part of what we call is produced through the Survey of Living Conditions. And the last poverty line, official poverty line that we have is from 2005. And what the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services does is that we inflate the poverty line utilizing current prices of goods and services in the country. So currently, the 143902, we have that established for 2016, where we utilize food prices at that time. We conduct regular and as-needed review of our standard means test. The last review we completed in 2021, utilizing up-to-date food prices from 2020. And currently, what I could add concerning the SLC, the CSO is currently conducting data collection exercise for the household budget survey and the survey of living conditions. I know the data collection phase is expected to be completed in January of this year, so this month. And we're expecting a final report later this year. And that will give us an updated poverty line. And once that data is available to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, we will utilize that in our decision-making going forward.
Okay. So follow-up question. Before I ask the follow-up question, what is the 2016 indigence line and the non-food poverty line?
Okay, so we have here the indigence line. We have it at 553.47, and the non-food we have at $885.55.
Yeah, correct. I'm seeing it here. But what does define both lines for me?
Okay, so how we come up with the indigent line, which you also call the food poor line, we utilize a basket of goods, food items, and that is based on a 2,400 kilocaloric intake, and that is how much calories that the average human would require to sustain life, and that is then used to come up with the basket of goods, and then we determine the price, and that is how we come up with the $553.47. And then that is further inflated to come up with the non-food item poverty line, which is the $885.55.
And both are based on 2016 prices?
Yes, that's what we're using right now for the ministry's SMT.
So your non-food poverty line I'm deducing from your responses, that includes transportation costs.
Yes, generally transportation cost is considered under the non-food items.
Right, so, and we come now to the question. The increase in transportation costs over the period 2022 to present, how have those increases impacted your non-food poverty line? And what has the ministry, has the ministry seen an impact, an adverse impact, that would move the ministry to increase either by way of modifying your means test to give additional grants, or to prepare to move this non-poverty line upwards? Let me rephrase the question. Has the movement in the upward movement in our fuel costs motivated the ministry to either adjust its standard means test to capture more persons, or motivated the ministry to look at moving this non-poverty line upwards?
Thank you for that question. Presently, the ministry has not taken any step to do so.
Okay. So, as far as the ministry and your information, has advised you, there is no adverse impact significant enough on the poor and indigent to increase your social benefits that you offer to the poor and indigent.
We believe at the ministry that the poor and indigent have been impacted just as other citizens by the fuel cost increase. However, in order for the ministry to increase these prices, we need inputs from outside of our space to do so. As my colleague would have indicated, presently there is some work that is being done by CSO, and we are hoping to get some of that information that would allow us to look carefully at what the poverty line is. That would allow the ministry to take the necessary steps to go forward in making recommendations for increasing, if that is the case, the grants that we have at the ministry, we are presently providing at the ministry.
By way of your feedback from those citizens who you serve, has that feedback indicated any particular increase in hardship as a consequence of the increase in fuel prices?
Because of the increase in fuel prices, it is expected that the funds that we make available to our clients for grants that are impacted by increase in commodity costs due to increase in production and manufacturing and the like, it will reduce what they actually have as the disposable part of it. Whereas previously, the basket of goods they would have been able to procure was at a particular level. They definitely would be able to procure less at this point in time. So while we do not have the data that speaks to the type of impact, negative impact that is, that our clients are experiencing presently, we do know that they would be experiencing some negative impacts from the increase in fuel costs.
But that's anecdotal. You have not done any studies, because we're talking about when your colleague described the indigence line, We're talking about the amount of calories that one is expected to consume, in terms of basic needs and basic requirements. We don't know definitively, because we have not done any studies, whether or not there is significant hardship being experienced. Because, when prices go up, one of the things that you would find is that someone would, try to become a little more efficient in their consumption. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the increase in food prices would correlate with a reduction in their caloric intake. So, but okay, we're talking anecdotally. You've not received or collected or collated any sort of feedback that indicates from those grant recipients, grant beneficiaries, that they have been experiencing significant hardships.
We have not.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to what you've described as transport poverty. How many households within your systems are afflicted with transport poverty? But we're looking at, is it in your answer, your answer seems as though it's a lot of individuals. Is it just your ELDAMO, meaning the elderly and differently abled persons, who you're regarding as within that category of transport poverty? If you could just add some clarity to that, please.
Thank you for that question. As indicated in the response, the ministry would have stated that we have not embarked on any study that would capture data in relation to the question that was posed to us. However, what was provided was information that we have on the number of individuals who would have utilized the service we had available over the period of time. And we went from fiscal 2018 to fiscal 2020.
And what accounts for the reductions?
That being said, if you look at the period here, I don't have exact data that speak to it, but this period covers what was the COVID period. Mm-hmm. Also, I know that there are issues with the number of vehicles that are presently available to be utilized. When the country was on lockdown, you didn't have that kind of movement taking place. So that would have impacted the amount of persons traveling at that time. But we do not have any study being done. This is just raw data that we have available within the ministry.
The ELDAMO service is provided by PTSC?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so we could probably get that information from PTSC. My last question, when you provide these food cards, I know it's known by a different name, but these food cards, do you track the types of foodstuffs being purchased? Are you able to?
Thank you for that question. While the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services have a list of grocery items that would have been made available to the various supermarkets that accept the food cards. In other words, items such as alcohol and cigarette should not be procured with that. The ministry and the system that we have in place presently has no way of tracking exactly what items our clients procure.
And no way of prohibiting
supermarkets are advised that it is not for that. So once a food card is being utilized, it is not supposed to be used for that. But we don't have a police standing over the cash register when they go up. In the absence of having somebody physically at each of these cashiers, we are not able to do that.
And there's no way of reconciling it either, because of course they could provide for you anything.
Pardon me?
There's no way of reconciling with the supermarkets what people may have purchased.
No. What the information that we have coming to us basically is the transactions that would have taken place, where the transaction would have taken place, and the amount that was expended on each transaction that was taken. Right? We have that information coming to us on a monthly basis, but that is through the bank provides us with that base, so we have that information.
Okay. Chairman? Yeah.
Thank you. P.S. Somewhere in the submission, I believe you had spoken to a $1,000 one-off grant for transportation. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Just so this was in terms of the increase in the fuel prices. So that has there been any information or data collated to see how this assisted and whether it is something that should be instituted on an ongoing basis, whether it's once a year or some other period to your clientele?
Okay, thank you for that question, Madam Chair. The Minister of Finance, when he read the budget last fiscal, and we had the increase in fuel prices being proffered as a buffer for clients, it was recommended that a $1,000 be given to each of our clients that we have on our books. That was done. While the $1,000 was given to each of the clients we have on our books that are receiving grants, no follow-up study was done to know whether or not it is something that should be done on a yearly basis. That being said, it should also be noted that presently all senior citizens or persons 60 years and over are able to travel free on the PTS service, the public transport service. Persons who are receiving public assistance, once they indicate that they want that facility, they are also allowed to travel on the public transport service. On a monthly basis, the ministry provides to PTSC funds to cover the amount of persons who would have utilized this service, and this information could be provided in writing to the body here. So while the $1,000 was a nice buffer, because of the other modes of ensuring that a wide base of our clients are able to travel on the public transport service, it might not be something that is, one, sustainable and necessary for the clients, that additional $1,000.
QPS, I didn't get those. Thank you for that. I didn't understand the payments being made to the PTSC, because, I mean, if you're entitled to free transport, I guess it's a question of what your ID card says. So the money that you provide for the PTSC for your clients who you say request the free service, did I understand that?
So you have persons 60 years and over
right.
are entitled to travel.
Right.
So while it's free to the clients, it's at a cost to our ministry. Now, the ones that is persons who want public assistance, once they indicate that they would like to get a bus pass, that is provided, because you have some people, even though they're on public assistance, they might not decide to travel with the public transport.
So these will be the people under 60?
Yes, right? So they might not decide they want to travel with, but once they make that known to the social welfare officers, when they present themselves, when the grant is being provided, that is processed for them, so they have that option available to them as well.
All right. So the people over 60 automatically will get. That has nothing to do with you. There's no cost to your ministry with that.
There is a cost.
There is a cost?
Yes.
So that one does not automatically qualify for the free transport on the PTSC bus if you are 60 and over?
Yes, you automatically qualify for it, but we are billed at the ministry for it. It is a service providing, and it is at a cost. Right?
Yeah.
So while it's free to our client or to senior citizen, there is a cost.
So let me ask something, and it's for you, Madam PS and PTSC, to clarify. So if somebody is 60 and over, but they're not a client of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, they're not entitled to the free transport on the PTSC bus?
They're entitled.
And who bears that cost?
But it's still a cost to us.
But I'm not a client of yours. So how are you billed? How is that? PTSC, could you help me?
Madam Chair, we track, I indicated earlier, we track ridership and we track the demographics. So we identify those persons who are over 60 who would have traveled. We identify persons in school uniform who would have traveled and so on, and we bill the Ministry of Social Development. But the citizen presents at the bus with their ID card, and they are allowed onto the bus using the ID card.
Right, so I understand now. So that regardless of whether the person is a client of the Ministry of Social Development, you bear the cost of the ridership. Yes. I mean, and that is really revealing to us, right? Yeah, and I believe you bear it also for the school children?
No.
No, only for the people 60 and over?
Yes, Ministry of Education.
Ministry of Education will deal with the children in uniform.
Okay. All right. So that in terms of transportation poverty, as far as the rising fuel prices, when it comes to people 60 years and over, that shouldn't affect them, provided it's on the PTSC 79 operational routes. That doesn't affect them.
Yes, Chair. But if they're using their own vehicles, now the increased fuel cost will impact on them.
Yeah, but do you have clients who own their own vehicle if you're looking at the indigent and the vulnerable? You would have information with respect to that?
We don't have that data presently.
Okay. All right. So let me ask PS, would you have any data to support that the increase in fuel prices may have had a direct impact on a number of people who are now approaching you to qualify for food support and public assistance grants?
Thank you for that question. But the data we have available to us will not speak to whether or not an increase or decrease in the amount of clients we have coming forward is directly related to increased fuel costs. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, the clients you have coming to you are because they're fell on hard time, not employed, or the funds that they're receiving doesn't allow them to meet their monthly expenditure and treat with food effectively. So it's a combination of things that would have persons walking through a door to get food support.
Yeah, so it'd be more generalized things rather than tracking individual factors.
Yes.
Because transport is one of the factors.
It is one.
That you look at. Okay. Anybody else has any questions that they would like to ask? Might I invite member participants into the conversation?
To piggyback on that, so I'm curious as to how the ministry plans a budget.
Okay, thank you for that question. We would usually, just as any other ministry, but particularly because of our grants, we will look at what our expenditure would have been the previous year. That is a good guideline to it. But in order to come up with our figures, you would look at the number of clients you have on particular grants, and that figure would be calculated. Example, you look at how many persons you have on senior citizen, public assistance, food support, and these figures are collated. So therefore, your expenditure of the previous year is a good guide towards what you might need for the following year. Of course, you would have to make some projection as with any budgeting when you're doing, because your figures are not static. And right now in Trinidad and Tobago, where you have people living longer, the number of persons you've seen on seniors as senior citizens, you have many coming on, and they are living for longer, so they are on it for a while. So these are some factors you look at when you're looking to budget.
All right, so I want to go back to the Eldamo service. And P.S., in your submission, you indicated after COVID, the service has not been resumed. And this really now is for the PTSC. Any idea of when the service will be resumed?
Yes, Madam Chair. The service has not been resumed in full, but it is operating to some degree. In San Fernando, we operate on a daily basis with a number of clients, and we operate on a demand basis, generally through the Ministry of Social Development for the Division of Aging. We have worked with them when they require the service. A request is made, and we make the bus available with drivers. For
Let me ask you, when last a request was made by the ministry?
A couple of months ago. But the one in San Fernando operates. Yeah.
So the one in San Fernando operates, nowhere else operates, except a request is made?
Except there's a request.
Okay, because, maybe I misread what is here. The Eldamo service has not been in operation since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020. Additionally, the ministry was advised by the PTSC that its fleet of buses has almost reached its end of life and a new fleet has to be purchased. Is that right or wrong?
That's correct.
That's correct. So, therefore, I want to ask, does the Ministry of Social Development and Family Service know that on a request you will be able to fulfill that request? Because I understand it is if they had a request for a service to operate in Toco, you could fulfill that request with your existing fleet.
If a request is made, we will determine based on what is the request, whether we are able to fulfill it, and we would advise accordingly. That is how we work with the Division of Aging. In San Fernando, we have standard clients who...
I understand that. But what we're trying to understand so that the ministry, so that I am certain that the ministry understands how this request things work and what you will be able to supply. Okay? So that you say on the basis of a request, you can supply the service. I'm now hearing, on the basis of a request, you can consider supplying a service, which is two different things. Okay? And I also asked when last a request was made. You said a couple of months. And maybe it's because that recent or immediate past requests have not been complied with, that no other requests have been made. So let's kind of understand what you could deliver so that, because I'm sure there's a need for the service. So if we could get an understanding of what you can deliver, then the Ministry of Social and Development and Family Services could be guided accordingly. So I ask you to give us some guidance with respect to what factors would allow you to fulfill a request in what areas, of what nature, whether it will be once a week in a particular area, based on your fleet and your other resources.
Well, it depends on the client, really, what the end user, the disability of the end user is a factor there. We also need some advance notice in order to identify bus, driver, and have it allocated for the specific detail. One-off requests are obviously easier because it's not a recurring issue. So those are the ones that we are better able to satisfy.
Okay. So for a one-off request, how much notice do you require?
Generally, we get 48 hours notice and we are able to survive.
Okay. And what are the caps on the disabilities that you can meet? Because you said it depends on the nature of the disability.
Well, the driver and the driver is not trained to interact with persons with disabilities. So there are issues with regard to persons assisting, persons accompanying the person who is disabled. All those are issues, factors that will be taken into consideration.
So it is really on an individual basis that you will know whether you can provide the service on a one-off basis.
On a one-off basis.
I don't understand why you ain't getting any requests. Okay? Because by the time all that information is sent and so on, if I needed the bus to go to get my eyes, to go to the health center, by the time you have to get all of that, the appointment gone. That's most probably it. Remember, Michelle?
Just to piggyback and follow up. But isn't the Eldamo service a very inefficient service? Isn't it that it's a big bus that goes to pick up one person to take them somewhere? So the question that I have is, and I'm working on that premise, that it is very inefficient and you don't have enough buses. Many of the buses are out of service. Isn't it that we need to get either to a point where there is a different system in place with smaller units that can pick up persons in their wheelchairs and take them, or that the new buses that you're ordering come equipped for persons with disabilities? Have you considered moving away from this inefficient Eldamo service?
You are quite correct, member, that the bus has a capacity for 11 persons, 8 seated and 3 wheelchair positions. And at times, yes, the bus will be carrying one person. In San Fernando, where we have a group of persons, it's a little more efficient in that grouping. We have some buses at this point in time that do in fact have the wheelchair access to the buses. Mm-hmm. A number of them are in service. And yes, the specifications for the tender did call for universal accessibility on the new buses. So yes, that is one of the strategies to streamline the usage of the buses by persons with disabilities.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. At this stage, I think we should move on to the Ministry of Trade and Industry. If it is that any members wish, when we finish with the Ministry of Trade and Industry, to come back to any other ministry, and time permitting, we will do so. so that in terms of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, I wanted to ask, in terms of, you were telling us about some of your initiatives, and particularly interested in this, what you call it, your green manufacturing initiative, which is supposed to begin in fiscal 2024, which is aimed at reducing the carbon footprint in Trinidad and Tobago. Have any, let's say under the energy efficiency audit assessment, has there been any utilization of this mechanism by any medium-sized manufacturer? And if so, how many have utilized this component of the initiative? And also, what is the capacity for utilization of this initiative?
Thank you, Chair. And I'm glad you all kept us last.
You know, they say they save the best for last.
Yes. I was enjoying the conversation, the discussion on intelligent transfer systems and Eldamo and the checkered band maxi-taxi system. But the Green Manufacturing Initiative is our contribution to the country's decarbonization strategy. I think PS Bradshaw Niles rightly said that for us to achieve as a country our goals, it is a whole lot of different ministries have their own contribution. Green manufacturing relates to getting the manufacturing sector as a major contributor to greenhouse gases in the non-energy sector, making that transition into green and renewable technologies. This is an initiative that was approved by the Cabinet in October 2023 and announced by the Minister of Finance. The initiative is going to be launched later this month, so I share your enthusiasm to find out the impact of the initiative, but it is going to be launched this year, and concomitant with it, when we were developing the initiative, we did quite a bit of research to discern existing incentives that were on our tax laws, and we did discern that there were a number of pieces of incentives that were enacted by the Parliament as way back as 2010, and several of those were inoperable. And so what we have done is done a deep dive into figuring out why those were not utilized, and we have made recommendations which were approved by Cabinet to amend the different pieces of legislation, and we are working with the CPC, Office of the Attorney General, to bring those amendments through in the upcoming, I believe it will be a finance bill, that is the next finance bill. So, but just to share, the Green Manufacturing Initiative is made up of three components. Component one will be helping companies in the manufacturing sector to undertake energy audits, and it will fund 100% of the cost of those audits, capped at $200,000 for small manufacturers and 50% for medium-sized manufacturers up to a ceiling of $150,000. After the energy audit, as one would expect, firms would require assistance to implement the recommendations of the audit, and component two would be to assist firms in the purchase and installation of equipment and technologies, and this will fund qualifying costs up to 100% for small manufacturers and 50% for medium-sized manufacturers. Component three, of course, being the training and upskilling of staff, because part of creating a decarbonized economy is building the capacity within the private sector for persons to be able, I know the word monitoring and evaluation came up quite a bit during the course of this discussion. Firms need to have trained personnel in-house to be doing that work in the private sector, so that when the government asks, what are your carbon reduction outputs, they can report that to the relevant government agency. So that's the initiative, but as I said, That is a direct grant that the government is going to give to firms in the manufacturing sector. But the real fillip is going to be the fiscal incentives, because those will be firms investing in their own renewable energies, and of course getting the fiscal incentives, which will contribute the direct state grant funding to help the state reach its renewable energy goals.
So you're targeting under this initiative how many?
Right.
You say small manufacturers up to 200,000 and medium-sized manufacturers up to 150,000.
Right. So in this first year we are targeting. Candace, if you could help, yeah.
So in this first year, we are targeting 50 firms, but we expect that, as you would appreciate, the audit has to happen first, and then you would identify which recommendations will be implemented. So while we might have an uptake on component 1, which is the energy efficiency audit, the actual implementation will be a less number of firms that would be implementing, so less than the 50. Right. And we're targeting small and medium enterprises. We have some large enterprises as well, but as you would also appreciate, we have had conversations with the National Energy Corporation, and they themselves are doing similar work in terms of some of the larger organizations. Okay. So we're not duplicating efforts.
All right, so let me ask something, thank you. So that if somebody applies for funding under the Green Manufacturing Initiative, you're not necessarily required to go from component 1 to component 3?
No, because one should appreciate that some persons will undertake their own energy audits, and we have quite a bit of manufacturers in Trinidad who have already done that work. So you don't have to start over, right? Obviously, if you have done that work and your work have been undertaken by a certified auditor, for want of a better word, you can go straight to implementation and access level 2, and or even level 3. You want to begin to certify your staff in this area in that area discipline. Right. You could go straight to component 3.
Okay, fine. So that it might be difficult to say overall the number of firms.
Right.
You know for sure if he's starting at component 1, you could only fund 50.
Right, exactly.
Right, but then any firm, providing they have passed phase 1,
right,
could join the initiative at a different stage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, thanks very much. And you said this is to begin when?
It will be launched this month, January 2024, and then of course we expect an enthusiastic response from the private sector, because we have been working very closely with them, and as soon as the applications come, we process the grants, etc.
In terms of the training and the upskilling of the staff, is there any sort of monitoring component by the ministry after these staff have been trained for compliance and so?
Right, so good.
So with respect to that, the whole point of having that particular training and upskilling of staff is because we need personnel within the firm to be able to track the reduction in carbon footprint. So what we've decided to do is, after they've been trained, put particular criteria, mechanisms of how much less natural gas you're using, how much, whatever it is that they're implementing, have it reduce your electricity costs, etc.
So there's a sort of reporting regime.
Regime that they, having been trained, they are now responsible for reporting, and having also been physically in the firm, they should be able to report.
Okay, so they'll be reporting to your Ministry
of Trade and Industry.
And is there any sort of mechanism for verification? Apart from the reporting?
We would have to do, now that's not in place, but we would have to do site visits to determine what mechanisms. We'd have to look at what they're recording, probably do particular audits to determine that what they're recording is actually what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
So we'd have to put
staff for that?
We would have to, we have a team that's responsible for implementing the GMI, but we would have to put particular mechanisms in place to accommodate that.
Yeah. No, I'm only asking that because my understanding is somebody could begin at component 3.
Right.
So come February, you might have somebody who qualifies, or bodies, firms, to qualify at component 3 because...
Yeah.
All right. I don't know if the training of itself is designed for a certain fixed period. Okay, so let's say it's 18 months. It means at the end of 18 months, they're supposed to begin the monitoring and the reporting. Right. So I'm trying to find out this sort of system of verification that is to be put in place. When are we going to design that so that it could kick in as soon as we do have trained people?
Right. So that system is being developed as we speak, because it will be monitoring and evaluating the targets that have been set by the Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Energy. The certification we're speaking about is international certification, because I only discovered that this is really a big discipline, and it's actually meant to create. It's kind of exciting because it's meant to create a totally new discipline in Trinidad and Tobago of persons trained. It's called the environmental compliance officers. And that's like, when project management started, everybody went into project management and risk management. But part of making sure that the country has a clear ability to monitor and evaluate its carbon emission, carbon reduction goals is to create those persons in the private sector who would be trained being able to report on the targets that would be set by the government. And so that whole M&E framework will be done in conjunction with the private sector, of course, based on the targets that the country have set. I would love to say that we've clearly understood how it's going to work, but it's a work in progress. We do have consultants working with us, and they have been tasked to help us flesh out that framework of reporting.
Okay. So that my understanding is that is not as yet ready because you're concentrating on component 1.
Yes.
Okay, but I also expect that for component 3, which you say somebody could jump on board of that.
Yes.
So that you're giving me an idea of time frame when you feel this design.
Right. Well, as I said, we are working with some service providers. Yeah. I don't want to guess the answer to the question, but I assure you that we will put that in place because obviously that it's linked to the success of the program, right? But we will be by the end of the first quarter of 2024, we would have that framework in place. Yes.
Okay, thanks so much. P.S., could you tell us a bit about the Bermuda's Biscuit Company and Kiss Company pilot project? I mean, I know it's relatively new, but what is the end time for the project? Because again, it's exciting and it's so much hope for it to be modeled for other industries.
So with respect to these two projects, these are implemented under the NEC. So this is not under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, it's with the NEC. We came to know of these projects when we started to develop the GMI and do the extensive research as to what exists. And so the NEC came to us and informed us that the ESCO, the Super Energy Services Company pilot project that they're implementing is with Bermuda's and with KISS. So in terms of the commencement, it has started. I know that both are in train. I can't tell you at this very moment when it's expected to be completed, but I know that both of them are in train and it's being implemented.
All right, so thanks a lot. So in terms of this Bermuda's and KISS, and also I guess with respect to the one with the shipping, these are not under you all, and these are examples I guess you've given in your submission as positive results that come from rising fuel prices. So you're trying to say, look, all of it is not for us. Private sector has embarked on some other projects. Yes. Okay, but in terms of these two initiatives, is there any role for the ministry to be interested in the results?
Yes.
To see how these could be mirrored for projects that maybe you all can use as models?
Yeah, so yes, Madam Chair, as Candice candidly indicated, we only discovered about these two projects when we were designing our own system. And we said, but it sounded like what we're trying to do, right? So what we have done is brought all the some of the state entities involved in any type of green manufacturing initiatives, and we discern NEC and NGC. And what we have decided as government is to collaborate very closely together so that we're not duplicating our initiatives. And both entities helped us make the recommendations in the rollout of our GMI and on the legislative amendments to perfect the framework and to share information so that so their projects would feed into reporting to us and vice versa, so that all of us are working on the same playbook, so to speak.
Okay. So let me find out, in terms of a lot of your submission tended to say, look, it's not so much rising fuel prices may have impacted on increased cost of production or increased cost of supply. There was a question of the Ukraine-Russian war, and you've listed certain things. I'm really interested to know what informs your analysis to that conclusion, because in one of the responses, and I'll find it, you almost said, look, it can't be rising food prices. It has to be the war in Russia and those other world events. What really informs that?
All right. So, Chair, in preparing for the submission, one of the basic questions that we asked ourselves is, what exactly is the retail sector in Trinidad? And we actually went to the CSO and got a breakdown of how they measure the retail sector. And it may interest you all, it's kind of boring, but to the public, it is covered, they track it under our standard ISIC classification. And the retail sector in Trinidad and Tobago is made up of selling tobacco and equipment, household items, motor vehicles, cultural and recreational goods, ICT equipment, automotive fuel, and non-specialized and specialized stores. So retail is so broad. And when we examined, ultimately the impact on the rise in fuel prices should be seen in your inflation data. Because if you're not seeing it in the inflation data, then that's the best proxy to see how you're doing in terms of the effects. When we looked at the CSO data, obviously there was a significant increase in food prices during 2022, and much of that, as we said, some of that will be linked to fuel cost, but bearing in mind that we import a lot of what we eat and our food import bill, and it is well known that in the international economy, international commodity prices flew off the roof during 2022, exacerbated by a lot of conditions, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict and international weather conditions, rising shipping costs globally. And we would have seen that data we track the data, import data, and we track very closely the cost of items coming into the country. And we would know that that's obviously not in the domestic economy. It's imported inflation. A lot of it is the imported inflation. A significant portion is because we see the retail invoices. We see what is the value of goods coming in. And therefore we were able to say, okay, this is obviously contributing to the rise in the final output and prices. And of course that is now juxtaposed by your domestic market conditions with fuel prices. And that's how we were able to discern that it's not only the rise in domestic transportation cost, but also what's going on in the international economy.
Right. So what we were really concerned about is the impact of the domestic fuel.
Right. So
rise.
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
if you're telling me, you could track externally, so up to when it's landed here. Therefore, what we were interested in, what happens between when it's landed here and when it reaches the shelf.
Right.
And that, to me, with all due respect, is what is missing from your submission. It almost seems to be defending inflation overall. We are accepting Scotland, Ukraine, and wherever else, and supply chain and all of that kind of issue. But in terms of the information with respect to what the local fuel prices.
Right. So the honest answer to the question is we don't measure the impact on that work is done by the CSO. So what we look for at the ministry, so we monitor final food prices, and that falls under the purview of our Consumer Affairs Division, and we do on a monthly basis report food prices throughout a range of supermarkets in Trinidad and Tobago on the basic food items, and that's religiously done on a monthly basis. As to what is contributing to that in the domestic economy, we look to the CSO when they publish their quarterly statistics and the inflation numbers. How is with the basket of goods moving, the retail price index, etc. And that is the only proxy we have as to the source of what the contribution of the domestic increase in prices on the final shelf price of items. So we don't do that analysis. Sorry, we don't do that data collection. Once the CSO does their work, then we analyze.
Okay. So would I be correct then in concluding that from your perspective, there is no mechanism to ensure that when prices fall globally before they land here, that there's a similar decrease reflected in the retail selling price?
As I said, Madam Chair, we look at the final price. So we track the movements of final prices on the supermarket shelves. What contributes to that is as a combination of domestic and international market conditions. We can't say if what's going on internationally, because as I said, we see what's going on at the border. Mm-hmm. But as to if that contributes more to what's going on in the domestic economy, there's no mechanism as we speak. We will look to the CSO and the central bank to demystify those issues for us.
Okay. Member Mitchell?
Yeah. Madam Chair, I mean, just to piggyback, and I agree. So we're looking at the domestic prices and their contribution to the increase of goods and services to the consumer. So by way of example, the domestic fuel prices will contribute by way of increase in the cost of logistics, which is transportation, and the increase in that input that is fuel or power. But you're saying that there is no way that the Ministry of Trade and Industry can disaggregate, or there is no monitoring and evaluation to see whether or not the increase in fuel prices has contributed in any significant way or at all to the increase in goods and services locally. Am I correct?
Correct, yes.
That is within the purview of the CSO. But just anecdotally, the manufacturer of goods, what type of fuel do they use?
Well, it's a combination, right? So the large manufacturers use a lot of natural gas in their manufacturing operations, but I think throughout the economy, when they talk about logistics, transportation, and distribution, a lot of it is diesel, right?
Yeah.
So it will be at which end of the supply chain you're talking about. But so it's a combination. Mm-hmm. You see, and that's why I said it's important to understand what the retail sector is made up of, because someone operating in a mall selling retail goods is not going to be impacted as much by the rise in fuel prices as someone supermarkets who there's a daily delivery of goods and services, cold storage, and etc. So fuel cost is different. It's a different portion of your operating cost depending on what subsector of the retail sector you're in.
And in your conversations, as I know you have regular conversations with these chambers of commerce and these different associations, have they indicated to you and attributed any increases that they may have passed on to the public by the increase in super premium or diesel?
Yes, most certainly, and that I mean we have those discussions on a regular basis, and yes, they have indicated that. Because in preparing the submission, we would have had discussions with the business associations, and they indicated affirmatively.
And have you collected any sort of data, even informally, on how much those increases were?
Yeah, unfortunately, no. But no.
No. Okay.
Yes, in the submission, when we had asked with respect to levels of employment in the retail sector, you had indicated that you don't collect information on employment in the retail industry. And therefore, I wanted to ask if that would be the remit of the Ministry of Labour.
No, again, it's CSO.
CSO?
Yes, CSO. We did get pulley data. I think it's on page 6 of our submission. And we've seen an increase in job numbers in the retail sector. As I said, the retail sector is included in trade and repairs subsector of the national accounts. And employment in the sector expanded by 1.2% from during 2021 to 22, with the number of persons with jobs increasing by 1,300. And we saw a similar increase in jobs in the year 2022. We haven't, I don't ever have 2023 data. Right, so luckily for us, we have our deputy PS came from the CSO, a senior official at the CSO, so Eva, you could add something.
Thanks for that, PS. Appreciate it. So we do have data up to second quarter 2023. The unemployment rate, overall unemployment rate was 3.7%, right? And the labor force was 609,000 odd persons. But when we look at the number of persons in the wholesale and retail trade, we're seeing that we had unemployment fall by just over 3,000 persons.
Which means 3,000 people got more jobs.
Yeah, more people got jobs. So we are seeing an increase. The thing is, remember during COVID, we would have had some of these shutdowns, so we would have had some unemployment going on in that area. So we are seeing some good recovery happening. You're seeing it in the GDP figures, you're seeing it in the unemployment. It's correlating with the unemployment data where unemployment is falling in those areas. And we're also looking at the inflation rates. So if you look at the inflation rates, say back in April 2022, it would have been 4.3%, and that has actually, it rose to 7.8% in March 2023, but it's gone back down. In November 2023, we're back down to 5%. So we are seeing some effects where we had the supply chain issues, the rising world prices and commodities happening, and you were asking earlier about are we seeing something happening as the prices of the commodity prices are going down? Are we seeing something? And it is being reflected to some degree. But I feel that if we really want to do a good analysis, like what you're asking, Chair, you and your members, we probably need to do a specific study in the area. This is something that has been bandied about for a very long time. I remember conversations years ago with the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago asking about imported price inflation. And yes, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, we do monitor prices. The CSO monitors 10,000 prices on a monthly basis. And it covers 3 retailers in 15 areas in the country. And coming out of the previous discussion where the colleagues from the Ministry of Social Development raised the Household Budget Survey of Living Conditions, that survey informs the construction of a new retail price index. So while I was there, I was very hopeful, and I'm even more hopeful now that I'm here, that we will have a revision to that index, because then it creates a basket of goods that is more relevant to our reality today than what we had before. Yeah?
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you very much, PS. And Mr. Michan? It's okay, you could go ahead. I'll come back at the end.
Yeah, could you just two questions clarify? What is the inflation rate as at October 2023? Is it 1.3%?
Nope. I know.
Headline inflation.
Okay, hold on. They're checking. Because I only wrote down in my notes November.
Yeah, November.
Yeah, I wrote down November 2023, 5.0. 5.4. It was 5.4 in October.
5.4.
Yeah.
And that is headline inflation?
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah. I mean, you would be more familiar with inflation than we would.
Right.
What is the component of the domestic fuel cost, if you can disaggregate that out?
All right. So if you look at our submission on page, which page is it? Okay, if you look at our submission on page 6, the top of page 6, so you have the table with the index of retail prices starting on 5, right? So if you look at 5, you're going to see first food and non-alcoholic beverages. All right, so the weights tell us the relative importance of each of those items to the total basket, and then we're looking at the changes in the index. So if we look at food, it goes from 130 to 148.2 from April 22 to September 23. And if we turn the page and we go to the top of page 6.
What do those figures mean, 130 and 148?
So you want the short answer or the long answer?
Short answer.
All right, so the short answer is that each one of these components are given a weight, a level of importance. All right? So food, out of 1,000, food is 173. And so it accounts for 173, let's say, points out of the 1,000. And the base year for this would have been 2015. So we would have said 2015 is equal to 100. Right? So you can think of it as a percentage change. So when we compare this with 2015, the prices of food would have been 30% more compared with 2015.
Okay.
So to answer the question, transportation makes up 14.7% of the basket. Because if you see, if you look at transport, it's 147 over 1,000.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And the second question, my last question, in terms of this retail price index and the basket of goods and transportation and all of those things in that basket, when called it that, when compared with other jurisdictions, I don't know if you have that information, where do we fall in Trinidad and Tobago?
I'm not sure. I can't answer that, but we can get that information.
So when compared regionally or extra-regionally, where do those prices fall?
We can get that
when compared. That would be important information for us. That's it.
Okay, so the last thing we wanted to ask you, and I mean, I know lots of times you said it was not you had the information, but you got the information. So one of the things we were interested on, again, is with respect to the online retailers, which, again, you had said is not within your purview. But just as before you had provided the information, could you then tell us, with respect to the online retailers, who regulates that? If there's any regulation of that at all?
Okay, so with respect to the online retailers, and what would be interesting for you to know is that with respect to the domestic retailers, so when we're speaking of online retailers, I'm not sure if you're referring to international or domestic.
Domestic.
So with respect to domestic retailers, we have just signed in December 2023 an e-commerce strategy for Trinidad and Tobago to be developed with UNCTAD. And this strategy would look at developing the whole e-commerce framework, but also looking at legislation in terms of regulating online retailers. So what is the criteria? What are some of the legislation that needs to be put in place to regulate online retailers? And so we've started we've signed the strategy. We have our first meeting in this month, our committee meeting to start. We've hired the consultants, the international and local consultants, and we plan to take 12 months to implement the strategy. And one of the areas that would be fleshed out in this strategy would be how we would regulate the online retailers, especially the domestic retailers.
So that hopefully by next year this time, there will be some kind of some sort of document that informs a policy to be
Correct.
developed.
Because once the strategy is developed, we then have to now implement the recommendations.
Yes.
Now we're seeking to implement the strategy sooner than the 12 months, and that's what we're aiming for. But once the timeline for the strategy is in fact 12 months. So once it's finished, we should have an idea of how we go forward in developing the necessary policies and legislation.
Right, but you'll need cabinet approval with respect to that.
Correct, yes.
Okay, yes, yes.
Yeah, if I can add, and that speaks to e-commerce in general, but you would appreciate that what you're touching on is wider consumer protection issues. And the Cabinet has already approved new legislation, a complete overhaul of the Consumer Protection Act. That policy has been approved by Cabinet, and a lot of work have gone into it. A draft bill exists, and it is being finalized by the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. And it is on our Ministry of Trade and Industries agenda to bring the legislation as soon as possible to the Parliament. And it will include the delivery of goods and services digitally and online. Mm-hmm. So that's another angle we will be seeking to regulate and strengthen the framework for online retail activities.
Okay. P.S., I know this might be hard for you to really respond to in a definitive way. You think that you're putting the legislation, at least bringing the legislation to Parliament, is likely to happen in calendar 2024?
We're always hopeful that our priorities are shared by everyone else. But as you understand the process, there's always national priorities that take precedence.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for reminding me. All right. Okay, so if there are no other questions for Ministry of Trade and Industry, and again, I ask if it's any other ministry we've had here, we've looked at before, if there are any questions you want to go back to. If not, I would say it's now 6:17. I think this is a good time for us to suspend this part of the meeting. I want to thank all the public servants here for the interesting conversations. The Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, the Ministry of Works and Transport, Social Development and Family Services, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry. I want to thank you all for the conversation. I want to thank the members of the media and the listening public for tuning in and staying with us during this discussion. I therefore now bring the public part of this meeting to an end. I want to wish you all safe journey home. I thank you. This meeting at this stage is now suspended.